The forest lay silent, shrouded in the gentle embrace of early morning mist. Sunlight struggled through the dense canopy, casting fractured patterns on the leaf-strewn floor. Every twig snapped under the careful step of a lone hunter, yet the world seemed unaware of him, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and the faint, metallic tang of distant water. Somewhere beyond the immediate hush, a river gurgled, carrying the whispers of life, both hidden and wild. A small camp sat tucked within the trees, smoke curling lazily from a central fire. Figures moved silently between tents and lean-tos, a mother tending to a child, her fingers tracing the contours of soot-darkened skin, a young man sharpening the edge of a stone blade, the rhythmic scraping echoing against the trunks of ancient trees. The people here were alive in their routines, yet there was a tension, barely perceptible, that threaded through the morning. Every glance was quick, every movement cautious, as though the very world could tip in an instant from serene to violent. Birdsong cut through the quiet, a melodic counterpoint to the ever-present hum of the forest. Yet beneath this ordinary soundtrack of life, something else lingered: anticipation. A predator somewhere unseen. A rival group perhaps, prowling beyond the hills. Even the wind seemed to carry a warning, rustling the leaves in anxious whispers. It was a moment balanced on a knife's edge, fragile and fleeting, pregnant with possibility. The hunter paused and raised his head, nostrils flaring. The forest smelled like rain, but also like something else, something that set his muscles on alert. His eyes scanned the shadows, catching the glint of sun off a distant stream, the fleeting motion of a deer, the subtle rustle of a bush that could mean another human presence. Here, in this world untouched by civilization, every action had weight. Every arrow released, every gesture of aggression or surrender, could ripple outward, shaping life and death in ways the hunter could not yet comprehend. Children ran between the tents, laughing quietly, their innocence untouched by the looming tension. A dog-like animal padded behind them, its low growl a reminder of the constant dance between curiosity and caution. These small details, the child's giggle, the animal's sniffing nose, the glint of dew on leaves, painted a picture of life teetering delicately between peace and chaos. One small spark, one choice, could ignite forces far beyond anyone's understanding. The fire crackled, throwing shadows that danced like living spirits against the tent walls. Inside, elders whispered quietly, recounting stories of hunts and battles long past. Their eyes, reflecting flickering flames, carried memories heavier than any arrow. Tales of survival, of alliances and betrayals, wove a tapestry of experience that the younger ones would absorb unconsciously, shaping who they would become. The world outside these stories, the forest, the river, the mountains beyond, waited patiently. Indifferent, yet attentive, it watched as humans prepared unknowingly for a moment that would forever alter their lives. In the distance, a bird took flight, its wings cutting sharply through the mist. It was a signal, though no one yet knew what it meant. Perhaps a storm gathering. Perhaps another hunter, silent among the trees. Perhaps nothing at all. Yet, in that silent, fragile morning, time seemed to slow. Every heartbeat resonated with both the beauty and the danger of existence. Life and death hung in balance, a delicate tension that would soon snap. And then, unseen by most, a figure readied an arrow. Fingers tightened on the shaft, eyes narrowed with focus. Breath held. The world held its breath with him, still unaware that this single, simple act, a motion so small, so ordinary in appearance, would echo through generations. It was a moment before the spark, the quiet before chaos, the pause between life as it had always been and life as it would become. The forest, the fire, the people, the children, all suspended in this single frame of time. And in that suspension lay the inevitability of change, the weight of decisions not yet made, and the silent, inevitable surge of history about to unfold. The forest was alive with secrets. Every branch, every leaf seemed to whisper stories older than the people who walked beneath them. Sunlight sifted through the dense canopy in fractured beams, illuminating patches of moss, the gleam of spider silk, and the occasional flicker of a small creature darting across the undergrowth. Here, the line between hunter and hunted blurred. The air was thick with the mingling scents of earth, wet leaves, and the faint musk of animals unseen. Each step could bring a rustle that betrayed movement, a sound that might mean life or death. Two groups of humans moved within this living labyrinth, their presence quiet but perceptible. One clan skirted along a winding stream, their feet careful on slippery stones, eyes scanning for signs of game or rival tribes. Men carried spears tipped with flint, their sharp points glinting in the light. Women followed behind, balancing baskets of roots and herbs, their expressions alert yet composed. Children clung to their mothers' skirts or ran ahead in bursts of daring curiosity, giggles muffled against the background hum of the forest. Every face carried a story, cautious, attentive, wary, as though they knew that in these woods, the smallest misstep could ripple into catastrophe. The other group moved along a ridge above the valley, their movements ghost-like, blending with shadows cast by towering oaks. Hunters communicated with subtle gestures, a hand raised, a tilt of the head, the barely audible click of a stone against another. They were attuned to the forest in ways that outsiders could not understand. Every snapping twig, every sudden rustle of leaves, every distant cry of an animal was catalogued and analyzed. The forest spoke to them, and they had learned to listen. Yet for all their attentiveness, no human could fully command this world. A sudden gust of wind sent a cascade of leaves swirling, a deer burst from the underbrush, and birds erupted into flight with shrill cries. Even the most seasoned hunter could only react, adapting instinctively to the constant, unpredictable changes of the environment. Survival here required patience, awareness, and a deep understanding of the balance between caution and action. One wrong move could spell death. The clans did not yet know of each other's presence. But the forest, in its patient, observing way, was already aware. It seemed to hold its breath, aware that paths would cross, that destinies would collide. Sunlight touched a river winding like a silver thread through the undergrowth, and in its reflection, the glint of a hunter's eyes could almost be seen, watching, calculating. The forest, dense and secretive, became both stage and silent witness to the events that would soon unfold. In the quieter corners of the woods, life went on. Small creatures skittered among ferns, insects hummed with persistent energy, and the occasional roar of a predator echoed through distant valleys. Each sound, each movement, was absorbed by the humans and weighed carefully against the risk of pursuit or ambush. Awareness here was not simply vigilance, it was an extension of the self, a constant dialogue between body, mind, and environment. Within one clan, a young hunter crouched beside a stream, examining the footprints of a deer. He traced the prints with his fingers, noting direction, size, and age, the process almost meditative. Around him, others prepared their tools, sharpening knives against stones, inspecting spears for cracks, weaving sinews into bows with meticulous care. Their movements were deliberate, choreographed in the dance of survival. The forest was alive, unpredictable, yet they moved with the precision of those who had learned to adapt. In the other group, atop the ridge, tension simmered under the surface of routine. Eyes scanned the horizon, listening for any telltale sound of distant humans or the flicker of movement that did not belong to wildlife. The clan leaders whispered strategies, considering routes for hunting, retreat, and the defense of territory. In this time, territory was life itself, a claim on resources, on safety, on survival. The forest could be both protector and predator, and they had learned to navigate its duality with skill and respect. The light shifted as the sun climbed, turning shafts of morning gold into slanting lines of warmth. Shadows stretched and shrank, playing tricks on the eyes, creating illusions of movement where there was none. Every hunter understood that misperception could be deadly. The forest taught patience. It demanded respect. And in return, it offered sustenance, shelter, and the chance for life to continue, fragile but unbroken. It was in this delicate balance that the first tensions of human conflict began to stir. Small signs, a bent branch, a displaced stone, footprints too fresh to ignore, hinted at another presence. Suspicion, curiosity, and instinct intertwined. The clans moved cautiously, aware that survival depended not only on strength or skill, but on understanding the rhythms and patterns of the world around them. Every heartbeat was measured, every breath intentional. The forest held them in a state of heightened awareness, a silent anticipation that foreshadowed the coming spark. Even the children, unaware of the stakes, sensed the energy in the air. Their laughter faded into hushed whispers as they noticed the sudden alertness in their parents' movements. The pulse of life quickened, as though the forest itself was drawing a deep breath. In this moment, the ordinary rhythms of existence began to stretch, bending toward the extraordinary. A single glance, a single step, a single sound could ignite forces beyond comprehension. As the sun rose higher, light pierced deeper into the forest, revealing glimpses of the world beyond the immediate safety of the camp. Valleys, hills, streams, and hidden clearings formed a tapestry of opportunity and danger. Every hunter, every gatherer, every child became a participant in this complex ecosystem, their choices threading together into a story that had yet to be written. And then, somewhere beyond the veil of trees, a subtle shift occurred, an almost imperceptible movement, a flicker of shadow where none should be. Eyes followed the motion instinctively. Fingers tightened on stone-tipped spears. Hearts raced. For the first time, the delicate balance of this hidden world was disturbed, and the forest seemed to lean in, waiting. The stage was set for a moment that would alter lives forever, a collision of human will, survival instinct, and the quiet, unyielding force of nature itself. The arrow lay on a flat stone, its slender shaft smooth and pale, freshly carved from a branch of ash. Sunlight glinted off the faint striations in the wood, revealing the meticulous care of hands that had learned precision through repetition and necessity. To any casual observer, it might appear simple, even insignificant. Yet in this small piece of craftsmanship, the weight of survival, ingenuity, and destiny was embedded. The arrow was more than a weapon, it was an extension of the human will, a bridge between thought and action, intention and consequence. Nearby, a young hunter knelt with careful focus, fingers tracing the length of the arrow as he attached sinew to secure the flint tip. Each wrap was deliberate, tightened just enough to hold, yet flexible enough to absorb the shock of impact. Flint had been struck and chipped over hours, shaping the sharp point with patience that bordered on reverence. Sparks had flown with the rhythm of a heartbeat, each one fleeting, yet marking a moment where creativity met survival. This was not simply a tool, but a product of knowledge passed down through generations. Around him, the forest hummed with life, indifferent to the human endeavor unfolding within it. Leaves quivered in the breeze, insects drifted lazily across the shafts of sunlight, and the distant roar of a river punctuated the quiet concentration of the hunter. Yet every detail mattered. A poorly made arrow could mean missed prey, wasted energy, or death. A well-made arrow, conversely, could secure a meal, protect a family, or turn the tide of conflict. In this fragile calculus of life, skill was inseparable from necessity. The young hunter paused to examine his work. The shaft was straight, the tip razor-sharp, the fletching, feathers stripped, trimmed, and lashed with care, perfectly aligned to guide its flight. The arrow seemed to hum with potential, a tension barely perceptible, like a string drawn taut, ready to release. In the right hands, it could pierce flesh, split the air with a whisper, and travel further than the eye could follow. In the wrong hands, it could do the same, but to a friend or kin. The arrow was neutral, it was the human intent that made it deadly. In the shadows nearby, others were preparing their own tools, bows carved from supple yew, knives honed on river stones, traps hidden in underbrush. There was a rhythm to their movements, a silent choreography learned from countless repetitions. Elders watched and instructed, their voices low and firm, guiding the hands of novices. Every tool, every weapon, carried the imprint of experience, a subtle testimony to the evolution of human ingenuity. In these small acts of creation, civilization itself took its first tentative steps. The arrow also carried cultural significance. It was not just a piece of wood and stone, but a symbol of skill, honor, and survival. The act of making an arrow required patience, knowledge, and respect for the materials and the life it would eventually touch. Hunters might speak softly to their tools, murmuring prayers or hopes for success. Feathers might be chosen for their color or origin, sinew measured and cut with ritualistic care. In these details, the arrow became a vessel of human intention, connecting the maker to the world around them. As the young hunter strung his bow, he flexed it slowly, feeling the tension of wood and string against his muscles. Each movement was deliberate, practiced, honed through repetition. He drew the arrow, fitted it to the string, and released it into the air. It cut through the forest with a faint whistle, vanishing into a patch of sunlight before striking the target, a bundle of reeds set as a test. The satisfaction of its perfect flight brought a quiet smile, a moment of triumph that belied the weight of responsibility it carried. In the broader context of the forest, the arrow was part of an intricate network of human survival. It connected the hunter to prey, the individual to the community, and the present to the lessons of the past. The techniques used, flint knapping, shaft shaping, fletching, were not learned in isolation but passed down over countless generations. Each arrow carried echoes of ancestors' victories, failures, and adaptations. In this way, even a simple object could embody the continuity of human ingenuity. Yet, as practical and utilitarian as the arrow was, it also embodied risk. In untrained hands, its potential for harm was indiscriminate. One careless release could wound, kill, or provoke unintended consequences. And so, while it represented survival, it also hinted at the fragility of human life, the thin line between safety and calamity. It was a reminder that every action had weight, and that even the smallest gesture could reverberate far beyond the moment. The arrow rested finally in the hunter's quiver, a bundle of possibility, tension, and latent consequence. He adjusted the fletching with a final touch, fingers brushing lightly against the feathers as if acknowledging their role in the unfolding story. In the quiet of the forest, the arrow seemed almost alive, a silent companion to the hunter's intentions. It was a tool, a weapon, and a symbol, the intersection of human skill, necessity, and destiny. And as the hunter rose, securing the quiver on his back and flexing his bow arm, the forest seemed to shift around him. Sunlight danced through the leaves, shadows stretched and contracted, and the air vibrated with unseen life. The arrow, though still, carried with it the potential for movement, for change, for consequences that neither hunter nor prey could yet imagine. It was here, in this small, meticulous act of creation, that the story of human conflict quietly began. The arrow, born of wood, stone, sinew, and skill, was ready to fulfill its role, a simple instrument whose impact would extend far beyond the forest, beyond the hunter, and into the heart of human experience. One object, one decision, one release, and the delicate balance of life, survival, and human emotion would tilt irrevocably. The morning sun filtered through the trees, painting dappled patterns across the small settlements nestled at the edge of the forest. Smoke rose in gentle spirals from several hearths, carrying the earthy aroma of cooked roots and roasted meat. The families stirred with quiet purpose, each person moving through their routines with a rhythm born of generations of survival. Here, among these clusters of tents and lean-tos, life seemed ordinary, even tranquil, yet the weight of unseen tension lingered like a shadow. The first family, known to one another as the Stonebrick clan, had lived in this valley for decades. The patriarch, a tall man with broad shoulders and deep-set eyes, moved with measured authority, his hands calloused from endless labor, crafting tools, carving weapons, and guiding his people through the rhythms of hunting and gathering. Beside him, his partner tended to the fire, stirring a pot of roots while keeping a vigilant watch on the children, her gaze sharp yet tender. Their eldest son sharpened a spear nearby, his youthful energy tempered by the careful teachings of his father. Every movement, every glance, carried lessons in survival and respect for the natural world that surrounded them. Children played among the trees, their laughter fragile yet insistent, piercing the calm of the forest with fleeting joy. Their games were simple, chasing one another through shadows, pretending sticks were swords, leaves becoming crowns and shields. Even in play, the forest's lessons were present. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig, reminded them of danger, of the boundaries between safety and peril. Their innocence, however, was a thin veneer over the knowledge that survival required attention, that even in joy, one must remain aware. In another clearing, the second family, the Ashridge clan, prepared for the day's hunt. Their leader, an elder with hair streaked by age and the sun, examined the tools with meticulous care. Flint-tipped arrows were lined neatly on a stone slab, each one polished and inspected. His partner braided fibers for snares and nets, hands moving with practiced precision. Around them, younger members of the clan learned the subtle arts of tracking, listening, and reading the forest. Every glance carried a silent lesson: eyes must notice movement, ears must catch whispers, and hearts must remain steady under pressure. Both families shared the same forest, yet the invisible lines of territory and instinct kept them apart. Each knew the other's presence, though direct contact was rare. Respect, fear, and a quiet awareness of competition underpinned their interactions. The forest itself seemed to enforce this separation, the density of trees and undergrowth providing both protection and isolation. Life was lived within these natural boundaries, defined by both opportunity and limitation. Yet even within this apparent peace, tension simmered beneath the surface. Small disputes over hunting grounds, fresh water sources, and shelter spots were common, handled with subtle negotiation or quiet avoidance. Elders reminded their kin that survival demanded not just strength, but diplomacy, observation, and patience. Each family, each individual, carried the burden of choices made in moments of scarcity or danger, knowing that one misstep could spark conflict that would extend far beyond the initial act. The children, unwitting carriers of legacy, observed everything. Their eyes mirrored curiosity and nascent understanding, absorbing lessons not through explicit teaching but through quiet imitation. The way the patriarch measured the distance to a tree before leaping onto a branch. The way mothers and fathers signaled warnings with subtle gestures. The children learned to read the environment, to decode intention and reaction, to understand the rhythm of life in the forest. Even their play mimicked survival: stealth, observation, timing, and agility all honed instinctively. Within the Stonebrick clan, the youngest daughter clutched a carved figurine, a small representation of an animal she had seen in the forest. Her mother smiled softly, placing a hand on her shoulder, guiding her gaze to the life beyond their tent. "Observe," she whispered. "Learn, and remember." Such moments, brief, tender, and often overlooked, carried the essence of cultural continuity. In these small interactions, values, skills, and understanding were silently transmitted across generations, preparing children for the realities of life in a world both beautiful and unforgiving. Meanwhile, the Ashridge clan engaged in a similar ritual, though more subtle. A young boy mimicked his father's movements, silently practicing the way to hold a spear, how to balance weight, how to anticipate the trajectory of a fleeing animal. The elder watched, offering only minimal guidance, trusting instinct and observation to teach the lessons that formal instruction could not. Knowledge was embedded in action, in attention, in the quiet awareness of consequences. Every gesture, no matter how small, carried the imprint of survival. In this forest, every face told a story. Wrinkles and scars marked experience, bright, alert eyes reflected alertness and curiosity. Hands bore the evidence of labor, shaping stone, stringing sinews, tending fire, and feeding family. Voices carried both instruction and reassurance, the gentle cadences of oral culture weaving a tapestry of memory, history, and foresight. Each family was a microcosm of humanity itself, resilient, adaptive, and deeply interconnected with the world around them. And yet, even in the most intimate moments of family life, the potential for conflict lingered. A stray arrow from a distant hunt, a misstep into another's territory, a misunderstood glance, any of these could ignite tension. The forest, while providing abundance and protection, also framed the fragility of human relations. Every action had the potential to ripple outward, setting off consequences far beyond the immediate moment. As the day progressed, the families moved through the forest in parallel yet distinct rhythms. Mothers gathered herbs, checking the freshness of leaves and roots, fathers and sons prepared weapons, daughters observed quietly, absorbing the interplay of skill, strategy, and caution. The forest responded with subtle changes, the shift of light, the movement of animals, the soft sighing of wind through branches. Nature's presence was constant, reminding every human of their smallness, vulnerability, and yet remarkable capacity for adaptation. By mid-morning, the first signs of the day's hunt began to appear. Hunters crouched low, eyes scanning the undergrowth, ready to spring into action at the faintest sign of movement. Children were called to the periphery, their attention directed elsewhere while adults moved with purpose. In these moments, every muscle was taut, every sense alert, every decision carrying the weight of survival. And even here, within the apparent focus on prey, the unseen awareness of other humans, neighbors, rivals, or potential threats, threaded through the hunter's mind. The Stonebrick and Ashridge families, while separated by terrain and instinct, shared a bond of circumstance. They were united by the rhythms of life and death, by the necessity of skill and awareness, by the ever-present need to adapt to a world that was as harsh as it was generous. In their faces, the smiles, the concentration, the quiet determination, the essence of early humanity was visible, resilient, perceptive, and profoundly aware of the delicate threads connecting them to each other and to the forest. And as the sun climbed higher, casting golden light across the canopy, the forest held its breath once again. The families moved through their routines, each small action layered with purpose and caution. The quiet harmony of daily life continued, yet the subtle tension of potential collision, human and natural, personal and communal, lingered beneath the surface. It was in these ordinary moments, these glimpses of intimacy and alertness, that the story of the first blood feud began to take root, hidden in plain sight among the faces of the first families. Life in the forest was a constant negotiation with uncertainty. Every day carried the possibility of sustenance and danger, often intertwined so closely that one could not exist without the other. The families had long since learned that survival depended not just on strength or skill, but on vigilance, patience, and an intimate understanding of the rhythms of the natural world. The forest was generous in its abundance yet indifferent to human desire. It offered food, shelter, and water, but it also harbored predators, venomous creatures, and rival humans whose presence could erupt into sudden violence. The Stonebrick clan moved carefully through the undergrowth, their senses alert to every sound and scent. A deer's distant rustle brought both hope and caution, the promise of meat for the family balanced against the risk of alerting predators. The hunters moved in silent synchrony, each footfall calculated, each glance shared in a language of subtle signals. The knowledge of where to step, which leaves to avoid, and how to read the whispers of the wind had been honed over years, taught by elders whose hands bore the evidence of survival. Every motion was a conversation with the forest, a dialogue that could mean life or death. Meanwhile, the women of the clan gathered roots, berries, and herbs, their hands swift and practiced. They checked for signs of poisonous plants, measured the ripeness of fruits, and ensured that every gathering would sustain the family without bringing harm. The air was filled with quiet sounds, the soft snap of twigs, the brushing of leaves, the low murmur of conversation. Even these tasks, seemingly mundane, carried stakes. A single misjudgment could bring illness, and illness could threaten the delicate balance of the clan's survival. In the Ashridge clan, similar rhythms unfolded. Elders instructed the young hunters in the subtle art of tracking, teaching them to recognize the difference between fresh tracks and old, to hear the faintest disturbance in the underbrush, to anticipate the movement of both prey and predator. Knowledge was passed not in lectures, but in shared experience, a tap of the foot, a shift of the hand, the silent pointing of eyes toward danger. The forest was both classroom and crucible, shaping children into capable participants in the relentless challenge of life. Every meal was a negotiation with chance. The hunt could fail, and the forest could withhold its bounty, leaving families hungry, exhausted, and exposed to elements or predators. Water could dry up, firewood could be scarce, illness could strike with little warning. Life on the edge was not romantic, it was raw, relentless, and immediate. Hunger sharpened the mind, fear honed the senses, and every decision carried a tangible weight. Even laughter and play existed within this context, tinged with caution, as children learned instinctively to respect the invisible lines of danger that threaded through the world around them. At night, the vulnerability of existence became palpable. Fires were kept low, flickering with shadows that danced across the faces of weary hunters and watchful children. The forest, alive with nocturnal creatures, seemed to breathe in unison with the clan. The howl of distant predators was a reminder of mortality, the rustle of leaves hinted at hidden threats. Sleep was taken in shifts, eyes scanning the darkness for signs of danger, minds never fully at rest. The edge on which humans lived was both literal and metaphorical, life balanced precariously between security and calamity. Despite the constant tension, moments of beauty punctuated the struggle. Sunlight breaking through the canopy, illuminating a patch of moss or a rushing stream. The sudden flight of birds startled by unseen movement. The quiet songs of insects blending with the wind. These small wonders reminded the humans of the world's generosity even as it demanded respect and caution. It was a duality they lived with daily, awe and fear, delight and survival, joy and vigilance intertwined inseparably. Conflict was never far from the surface. Scarce resources, territorial boundaries, and instinctive competition could ignite disputes with neighboring groups. Even within a single clan, hierarchy and responsibilities could breed tension, as younger hunters tested authority or elders weighed decisions that affected survival. Every relationship, every gesture, every choice carried weight. The forest did not forgive mistakes, and neither did life itself. In these circumstances, tools and weapons were not simply instruments of utility, they were extensions of the self, anchors of security, and embodiments of human ingenuity. A spear, a knife, or an arrow carried not just physical potential but also symbolic weight, representing skill, foresight, and the ability to protect one's kin. The act of crafting, maintaining, and wielding these tools was inseparable from the challenge of life on the edge. Every sharpened flint, every carefully carved shaft, was a preparation for both sustenance and defense, for ordinary hunting and the extraordinary pressures of human conflict. And yet, the human capacity for adaptation and resilience was profound. Families moved, hunted, and gathered with astonishing synchronization. Knowledge flowed seamlessly from elders to youth, intuition guided decisions, and instinctive alertness became second nature. The forest, though full of peril, was also a canvas for ingenuity and creativity. Humans learned to read its signs, anticipate its moods, and harness its resources, transforming vulnerability into mastery, however tenuous. Life on the edge was also philosophical, a constant meditation on mortality and meaning. Every breath, every heartbeat, every cautious step reminded humans that existence was fleeting and fragile. They were acutely aware of their smallness in the vastness of nature, yet this awareness did not breed despair, it fostered reverence, responsibility, and an understanding of interconnectedness. The edge was not merely physical, it was a lens through which humans understood the impermanence of life and the significance of each action, each decision, each moment of awareness. As the sun arced across the sky, casting its golden light through the canopy, the families continued their daily rituals, ever aware that the forest was alive, unpredictable, and impartial. The hunt, the gathering, the teaching, and the play all existed within this intricate web of dependence, danger, and beauty. Life was never static, never certain. It existed in motion, in tension, in the delicate negotiation between survival and aspiration, fear and courage, instinct and intellect. And so, the people of the forest moved through their day, eyes wide, hearts attuned, muscles ready, minds alert. Life on the edge demanded everything of them: skill, wisdom, patience, and a deep respect for the invisible forces that governed both nature and human interaction. It was within this tension, this razor-thin balance between abundance and peril, that the threads of future conflict quietly began to weave themselves into the fabric of existence, foreshadowing the spark that would ignite the first blood feud. Dawn broke softly over the valley, spilling golden light across the tents and lean-tos of the clans. The forest, still damp with the night's mist, shimmered as each droplet of water caught the sun's first rays. Birds stirred, chirping and calling in a chorus that blended seamlessly with the distant gurgle of the river. To an outsider, it might have seemed an ordinary morning, calm and unremarkable, yet in the rhythm of this day lay the intricate choreography of survival, alertness, and anticipation. Inside the stonebrick camp, the first stirrings of activity began. The mother lifted her youngest child from the mat of furs, whispering words of encouragement as she guided them toward the warmth of the fire. The smoke curled lazily upward, carrying with it the scent of roots and freshly roasted nuts. Nearby, the eldest son tested the sharpness of his spear, scraping the stone tip along a coarse rock. Every movement was deliberate, measured, purposeful, a dance between preparation and instinct honed over countless days of similar routines. Outside, other members of the clan readied themselves for the hunt. Hunters crouched low, moving through the underbrush with practiced ease. Each step was calculated, each glance sweeping the forest floor, watching for signs of game. The rhythm of movement was almost imperceptible, a combination of stealth, observation, and intimate knowledge of the land. Every snapping twig, every distant rustle, was catalogued, analyzed, and integrated into the hunter's decision-making. Children, however, were less restrained. They dashed between trees and over fallen logs, their laughter echoing softly through the forest. Even in play, they absorbed lessons vital for survival. Every hide-and-seek, every game of tag, taught them about shadows, sounds, and the subtle patterns of movement that separated predator from prey. Their small voices, bright and insistent, contrasted sharply with the deliberate caution of their elders, highlighting the duality of life in this forest, a world of both joy and danger. In the Ashridge camp, a similar scene unfolded. The elders moved with quiet authority, guiding the younger hunters through preparation for the day. Arrows were checked, bows flexed and tested, and snares inspected. The hands of experience passed down knowledge through touch and gesture, how to adjust tension in a bowstring, how to read the telltale signs of animal tracks, how to anticipate behavior in a world governed by instinct and necessity. Every tool, every weapon, every motion carried the weight of life and death. The forest itself seemed aware of these daily rituals. Leaves rustled with gentle sighs, branches swayed in patterns that mirrored the hunter's movements, and shafts of sunlight pierced the canopy to illuminate moments of preparation. The natural world was both a backdrop and an active participant, shaping behavior, guiding attention, and offering both sustenance and challenge. It was a living, breathing partner in the human story, impartial, demanding, and beautifully unforgiving. By mid-morning, the first hunters had set out along the winding paths and hidden clearings of the forest. Their eyes were trained to detect movement, their ears attuned to the slightest disturbance. Tracking required patience, focus, and intuition. A misread sign could mean wasted effort or danger. They moved silently, communicating through subtle gestures, eyes locking in brief signals that conveyed direction, caution, or opportunity. This silent language, learned through observation and imitation, allowed humans to navigate a world where one wrong step could alter the course of the day, or life itself. Back in the camp, women and children continued their tasks. Baskets were filled with roots, berries, and medicinal herbs, each item carefully selected for ripeness, utility, and safety. Conversations were low, often punctuated by instructions or soft corrections, as knowledge flowed naturally from elder to younger, from parent to child. The forest's rhythm dictated the pace: a sudden movement of a bird, a fresh track of a passing deer, a shift in the wind. Each detail prompted adaptation, a subtle recalibration of priorities and attention. Even meals were a reflection of the balance between ordinary routine and survival instinct. Food was shared communally, each portion carefully rationed. The taste of roasted roots or cooked fish was simple yet deeply nourishing, both physically and psychologically. Meals were also a time for teaching, for storytelling, and for reinforcing social bonds. Stories of past hunts, near misses, and lessons learned were passed along, embedding knowledge within the fabric of everyday life. Through these narratives, children absorbed not only practical skills but also moral and social lessons, shaping the future of their clan. Yet within this apparent normalcy, the potential for disruption was never far away. Every day carried risks: encounters with predators, rival clans, or the unpredictable fury of nature. The morning could transform instantly from calm to chaos: a sudden roar, a flash of movement in the underbrush, an unexpected storm rolling over the valley. Life on the edge demanded constant awareness, and even the simplest routines were laced with the potential for danger. As the sun rose higher, casting elongated shadows across the forest floor, the sense of timing and rhythm became crucial. Hunters coordinated silently, scouts returned with information about game or threats, and the younger members observed attentively. The orchestration of activity was seamless, a testament to the accumulated experience and intuitive understanding that defined survival. Every glance, every motion, every breath was intentional, calibrated to maximize safety, efficiency, and success. By midday, the camps hummed with quiet intensity. Children rested in the shade, elders surveyed their surroundings, and hunters paused to reassess strategy and direction. The forest, in response, continued its symphony of subtle sounds: wind through leaves, insect steady hum, distant calls of birds of prey. Every element, from the smallest moss-covered stone to the largest towering tree, contributed to the delicate balance that defined existence here. Humans were actors, participants, and observers all at once, navigating a world that was as dangerous as it was beautiful. And yet, for all the preparation, observation, and coordination, the ordinary day carried within it the seeds of extraordinary events. One misstep, one glance in the wrong direction, one arrow loosed too soon or too late, any small action could ripple outward, altering lives in ways no one could predict. This was the invisible tension that threaded through the mundane, the awareness that every routine, every hunt, every moment of play existed alongside the potential for disruption, confrontation, or tragedy. As the day unfolded, the forest itself seemed to pause at intervals, observing with patient impartiality. Hunters adjusted their posture, children followed instructions, elders imparted wisdom, and families moved in fluid harmony with the natural world. Life proceeded in cycles of action, reflection, and adaptation. Yet beneath this rhythm, an invisible thread of anticipation wove through the day, a subtle reminder that ordinary mornings, like this one, could serve as the prelude to events that would echo through generations. The forest had settled into a quiet lull, the kind that comes just before tension coils into action. Light filtered through the canopy in sharp, fractured beams, spotlighting patches of the forest floor, the occasional dew-laden leaf, or the subtle shimmer of a spider's web. The hunters moved like shadows, silent and deliberate, muscles coiled and senses taut. The young hunter who had crafted the arrow carried it carefully in his hand, the smooth shaft balanced perfectly, the flint tip glinting with latent promise. It was an ordinary tool for survival, yet in this precise moment, it carried the weight of consequence beyond comprehension. He crouched behind a moss-covered boulder, the forest breathing around him. His breath was slow, deliberate, controlled, each inhale measured, each exhale deliberate, blending with the whispers of wind through leaves. The target was a deer grazing just beyond the clearing, unaware of the human observer. Its ears flicked nervously, nostrils quivering, yet it remained engrossed in the quiet ritual of feeding. The hunter's eyes tracked the subtle shifts of its weight, the angle of its head, the rhythm of its steps. Every instinct, every lesson learned, and every moment of practice converged in his awareness. The bowstring was drawn back slowly, the arrow nocked with precision. Time itself seemed to stretch, each heartbeat echoing louder in the hunter's chest. The forest around him seemed suspended, as if aware of the impending act. A bird took flight from a nearby branch, its wings slicing through a sunbeam, yet the deer remained oblivious. The hunter's fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of responsibility, the understanding that a single motion could ripple outward, altering lives in ways he could not yet imagine. He exhaled softly, releasing the tension in his muscles just enough to hold the arrow steady. And then, with a faint whistle as the string snapped against the wood, the arrow flew. It moved through the air with uncanny grace, cutting through the sun-dappled space between hunter and prey. The trajectory was perfect, guided by both skill and instinct. The deer froze, startled by the sudden motion, and then fell as the arrow struck true. In that instant, the hunter experienced a cascade of emotion, triumph, relief, awe, and the subtle, unsettling awareness of life taken. The forest seemed to respond, leaves rustling in whispered acknowledgement, the distant call of birds shifting to a cautious murmur. Life had been altered with a single action, and though the hunter could not yet see it, the reverberations of that shot would extend far beyond the clearing. But the arrow's impact was not limited to the deer. From a hidden ridge, eyes had been watching, rival eyes, alert and calculating. The Ashridge clan had caught the movement of the arrow, the flash of human intent in the quiet of the forest. A murmur passed between them, subtle and urgent. Their leader's eyes narrowed, recognizing not just the hunt, but the assertion of territory, the display of skill, and the implicit challenge that accompanied it. In that moment, a seed was planted, the first inkling of tension that would grow into a deeper, more enduring conflict. The hunter retrieved the arrow from the fallen deer, hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. The act of taking life had always carried weight, but now, unknowingly, it carried far more. The forest around him seemed unchanged, serene, yet beneath its calm exterior, the potential for human conflict had been awakened. One action, one release, had bridged the space between peace and contention, between ordinary survival and the inception of what would later be remembered as the first blood feud. He approached the deer carefully, preparing to carry it back to the clan. The forest remained alert, almost sentient in its awareness of the fragile balance it held between predator, prey, and human intervention. The hunter's mind worked quickly, considering the most efficient path, the safest route back, and the possibility of observers, both animal and human. Every choice was fraught with consequence, every motion might be watched, noted, and remembered. Meanwhile, the Ashridge clan quietly observed, calculating and cautious. Their leader whispered instructions, gestures subtle and precise. The young hunters were trained to move, to anticipate, to react without disturbing the delicate equilibrium of the forest. Yet beneath this disciplined exterior, a simmering awareness grew, a mixture of curiosity, caution, and a nascent instinct for rivalry. The arrow, innocent in its purpose, had become a symbol, a marker of skill, presence, and perhaps unintended provocation. The air was thick with tension, a palpable current that wove through the trees and underbrush. Birds ceased their calls, small mammals froze mid-step, and even the wind seemed to pause. The forest held its breath, knowing that the moment of release had initiated a cascade of unseen consequences. One shot, intended to sustain life, now carried the invisible weight of human judgment, rivalry, and anticipation. The hunter returned to his clan with the deer, unaware of the eyes that followed, the thoughts that had already begun to take root in minds far removed from his own. The fire crackled in the camp as the meat was prepared, the familiar rituals of survival resuming, yet beneath the surface, subtle threads of awareness were beginning to intertwine. Respect, caution, and the instinctual calculation of consequences were quietly aligning themselves, setting the stage for the coming storm. Even the children sensed something had shifted, though they could not yet name it. Their eyes flickered toward the forest edge, their laughter more tentative, their movements less carefree. Instinctive tension threaded through the younger generation, a subtle echo of adult perception, carrying lessons that would be internalized and remembered. The arrow had struck more than a deer, it had pierced the veil of everyday normalcy, hinting at the fragility of the balance humans maintained with each other and with nature. As the day progressed, the forest seemed to exhale slowly, returning to its rhythm, yet the invisible lines of tension remained. The Stonebrick clan carried on with their routines, aware of the ordinary tasks that defined survival but unaware of the extraordinary chain of consequences set in motion. In the distance, the Ashridge clan planned quietly, their awareness of the first clan's skill and presence growing sharper with each passing moment. The stage was set, the players unknowingly aligned, and the forest itself seemed to acknowledge the subtle shift in energy that would precede conflict. The forest was quiet, yet alive with unspoken stories. Every movement of a branch, every rustle of leaves, every distant cry of an animal carried meaning for those attuned to its subtle language. News traveled not by word of mouth alone, but by observation, intuition, and instinct. A footprint here, a bent twig there, or the sudden flight of a bird could speak volumes to those who knew how to listen. In this way, the first hints of tension began to circulate, not in the open, but in shadows, glances, and hushed murmurs. By mid-morning, the Ashridge clan had gathered at the edge of their territory, watching the distant movement of the Stonebrick hunters through the treeline. Their leader, a tall man with gray-streaked hair and eyes sharp as flint, leaned on a spear, his posture tense and deliberate. He had seen the arrow released, or at least the subtle movement in the forest that indicated a hunt had occurred nearby. The shot was skillful, precise, and unmistakably human in its intent. It was a declaration as much as an act of survival, and it had not gone unnoticed. Whispers began to spread, first among the younger hunters and gatherers, then reaching the ears of the elders. "Stonebrick moved near our ridge," one murmured, a hint of suspicion threading the words. "They took what belonged to the forest," another added, glancing toward the distant treeline as though expecting the very trees themselves to respond. Even in their subtle tones, the urgency was palpable. What had seemed an ordinary hunt now carried the weight of unspoken competition, a potential challenge to territory, skill, and respect. Back in the Stonebrick camp, similar awareness was stirring. Elders and hunters exchanged brief glances, subtle gestures indicating understanding without the need for spoken words. The arrow had achieved its purpose, bringing meat for the family, yet it had also pierced the veil of peaceful coexistence. Even a seemingly minor act, a single shot in the forest, had the capacity to ripple outward, sowing seeds of curiosity, suspicion, and rivalry. Life, once rhythmically ordinary, had shifted subtly but irrevocably. Children played near the edge of the camp, unaware of the weight carried by the adults' careful glances and measured movements. Yet instinct worked quietly in them as well. They noticed the tension, the whispers, the subtle body language of adults who knew more than they were saying. Even the smallest gestures, a furrowed brow, a hand hovering near a weapon, the careful alignment of a spear, were absorbed and interpreted. Awareness of danger and caution was being imprinted, generation by generation, long before conscious understanding could emerge. Rumors, once sparked, moved like fire through dry grass. They twisted, grew, and took shape in ways that fact alone could not dictate. "Did you see the arrow fly?" one youth asked another in hushed tones, eyes darting toward the trees. "They've been testing our skill," a third whispered. Every word carried a mixture of speculation, awe, and unease. The forest seemed to respond, holding its breath, as if waiting for the unseen tension to find form. These murmurs were invisible arrows themselves, traveling silently, shaping perception, expectation, and emotion. The elders of both clans understood the power of perception. They knew that rumors, like fire, could spread quickly and unpredictably, igniting conflicts that might otherwise have remained latent. They had learned, through countless small disputes and lessons, that humans are as much shaped by what they imagine as by what they see. A glance, a motion, a tale of intent could be enough to seed rivalry, suspicion, or even vengeance. The first whispers of the feud were taking root, not in the act of the hunt itself, but in the minds and imaginations of those who witnessed it, however indirectly. Even the forest seemed complicit in these shifts. Sunlight glinted off dew on leaves like tiny, shining messengers, carrying reflections that momentarily misled the eye. Shadows twisted and danced with the wind, creating illusions of movement. The subtle play of light and dark seemed to heighten human perception, drawing attention to the slightest disturbance, encouraging speculation, and magnifying uncertainty. It was as if the world itself conspired to amplify the consequences of a single arrow, transforming it from a tool of survival into a catalyst for human intrigue. By late morning, the whispers had spread far enough to influence behavior. Hunters moved more cautiously, checking their surroundings for signs of observers. Women adjusted the placement of baskets and tools, subtly rearranging the camp to avoid inadvertent signals of activity. Elders conferred quietly, sharing observations, debating the meaning of what they had seen, and weighing whether action or patience was the wiser course. Every gesture carried double weight, practical in the immediate sense, but also symbolic in the broader, unseen web of social tension. The rumors also began to affect expectations. Every snap of a twig, every distant cry of a bird, every rustle of underbrush was imbued with potential meaning. The humans of the forest, highly attuned to environmental cues, found themselves reading more into subtle details than they might have before. Awareness, once purely practical, now carried an undercurrent of psychological tension. Eyes scanned not only for game or danger, but for potential intention, for evidence of rival presence, for the invisible lines of respect and challenge that governed early human interaction. At the heart of this network of whispers and observation was the realization that actions, however small, could carry consequences far beyond their immediate intent. A single arrow, shot in the service of survival, had inadvertently signaled skill, presence, and a subtle assertion of territory. In human minds, this signal was amplified, filtered, and interpreted in ways that would shape choices, alliances, and rivalries for days to come. The forest remained indifferent, yet the humans within it were now entangled in a web of perception, expectation, and potential conflict. By afternoon, tension had begun to solidify. The Ashridge hunters moved with quiet deliberation, their eyes alert for any sign of the Stonebrick clan, every sound carrying amplified significance. The Stonebrick elders, in turn, noticed subtle shifts in the forest, changes in animal movement, unexpected shadows, and signs that their presence might have been observed. Even as daily routines continued, the tending of fire, the preparation of food, the teaching of children, the undercurrent of rivalry threaded through every interaction. The ordinary day had become charged, a prelude to events that had yet to unfold but whose seeds were firmly planted. Children, caught between the worlds of innocence and instinct, began to mimic adult caution. Games became quieter, movements more careful, glances more attentive. Without fully understanding why, they sensed that the forest, and the humans who moved through it, were engaged in a subtle negotiation of power, skill, and awareness. The arrow, shot hours earlier, had done more than procure food, it had initiated a dialogue, a silent communication that would shape behavior, expectation, and memory. As dusk approached, the first flickers of tension between the clans became more tangible. The whispers and rumors that had traveled unseen through observation and subtle gestures began to solidify into shared narratives. "They were near our ridge," one voice said with quiet emphasis. "They watch us," another replied. Even without direct confrontation, the stories carried a weight of challenge, a sense that boundaries had been noted, and that respect, however subtle, was at stake. Night fell with a deep, encompassing quiet. Fires flickered, casting elongated shadows across the camps. Families huddled close, alert to every sound, yet attempting the illusion of normalcy. The whispers of earlier hours had transformed into a pervasive tension, unspoken yet felt by all. The forest remained constant, indifferent to human emotion, yet it had become the stage on which these early dramas of rivalry and perception were being played out. In the shadows, perception had become reality. A single arrow had sparked not just a hunt, but a network of stories, speculations, and cautious observations. It had moved through the forest as invisibly as wind, influencing behavior, shaping expectation, and planting the first seeds of what would become a long, enduring feud. Humans, guided by instinct, observation, and imagination, had unknowingly begun the delicate dance of suspicion and anticipation that would define the next chapter of their lives. And so, in the quiet of the forest, under the shifting light of dusk and the watchful eye of the moon, the stage was set. Rumors and whispers, subtle yet potent, had begun their work. One ordinary day had been transformed into a prelude, a quiet overture to conflict, and a reminder that in the delicate balance of early human life, every action, however small, carried the potential to echo far beyond the immediate moment. The morning fog clung to the forest floor like a shroud, softening the shapes of trees and rocks, muffling sounds, and blurring the line between visibility and imagination. It was a day like any other, yet the tension that had begun to weave itself through the forest in whispers and glances now simmered beneath the surface, ready to surface in unmistakable form. The Stonebrick and Ashridge clans moved through their respective territories, their steps measured, their senses heightened. Every rustle of leaves, every shift of shadow, every distant animal call carried dual significance, survival and suspicion intertwined. The Stonebrick hunters had ventured farther than usual, guided by the promise of fresh game and the instinctive need to secure their family sustenance. Their movements were deliberate, calculated, eyes scanning for tracks and disturbances, ears attuned to the subtlest shifts in the forest's rhythm. Yet beneath their practiced calm lurked an awareness of observers, a lingering echo of the whispers and rumors that had traveled unseen through the trees. The forest, which had seemed benign moments before, now carried an undercurrent of anticipation, as if it, too, sensed the impending collision of human will. From the Ashridge camp, the observers had mobilized quietly, eyes fixed on the distant silhouettes moving with intent. The leader's jaw tightened as he signaled the younger hunters to follow, gesturing with subtle precision. They moved like shadows, silent, careful not to disturb the forest's delicate balance, yet each step carried the unmistakable weight of imminent confrontation. Their mission was simple in theory: observe, assert, and defend, yet the complexity of human interaction, compounded by perception, pride, and the unspoken rules of early clan society, ensured that no moment would remain simple for long. The first sighting was subtle, almost imperceptible, a glint of sunlight off a flint-tipped arrow in the distance, the faint movement of a hunter crouching low behind a boulder. The Ashridge eyes tracked it instantly, recognizing the skill, the intent, and the implicit challenge it represented. The Stonebrick hunters, unaware of how closely they were watched, continued their methodical progress, focused on their immediate goal yet unknowingly threading through the delicate web of human observation. In these fleeting moments, the forest became a stage for invisible drama, each actor moving with tension, awareness, and instinctive caution. It was the young hunter, the one who had released the arrow days earlier, who first sensed a shift in the air. A sudden silence, the absence of bird calls, the stillness of small animals, alerted him to something beyond the ordinary. His eyes scanned the trees, noticing subtle movements, shadows, and shapes that should not have been there. Recognition flickered, rival humans, alert, observing, waiting. His breath caught, muscles tensed, and instinct took over. The hunt, once solitary and ordinary, had now become a prelude to a human encounter charged with unspoken history and nascent tension. The clans closed the distance with cautious deliberation. Both sides moved with calculated intent, aware that the first misstep could ignite a chain of events impossible to control. Words were few, gestures subtle, yet the forest seemed to amplify every nuance. The snapping of a twig underfoot felt like a trumpet's call, the sway of a branch under the weight of a passing hunter echoed like a drumbeat. Every micro-movement was observed, analyzed, and interpreted. This was no longer simply about food, it was about presence, skill, and an unspoken assertion of territory and respect. When the two clans finally came within sight of one another, the tension crystallized. Faces mirrored wariness and cautious curiosity, eyes flicking from one potential threat to another. The elders observed first, assessing, weighing, predicting. Hunters adjusted stances subtly, hands hovering near weapons, muscles coiled and ready. Children, hidden behind adults, watched with wide eyes, sensing but not fully understanding the weight of the moment. Silence reigned, broken only by the occasional whisper or crackle of underbrush. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath. The first words were cautious, deliberate. A greeting, measured and neutral, intended to establish presence without provocation. Yet beneath the surface, every tone, every inflection, carried layers of meaning. Pride, experience, and instinct combined to create a subtle tension in communication that the untrained ear might have missed, yet every participant felt keenly. One misread glance or poorly timed gesture could escalate beyond repair. In these initial exchanges, the groundwork for future rivalry and conflict was laid with a precision that rivaled the most carefully crafted weapon. And then, a minor misstep, an accidental brush against a branch, a clumsy shift of weight, transformed the delicate tension into immediate awareness of human fallibility and risk. Eyes widened, hands shifted to weapons, and subtle movements became magnified. What might have been ignored under ordinary circumstances now carried implicit threat, interpreted as challenge, audacity, or disregard. The arrow that had flown days earlier became a symbol, its presence felt invisibly in every glance, every posture, and every measure of distance between the clans. Elders intervened subtly, attempting to mediate, to control, to prevent the escalation from tipping into open hostility. Yet instinct and pride are forces that rarely heed subtle control. The younger hunters, brimming with energy, alertness, and curiosity, mirrored tension with increased vigilance, eyes darting, muscles twitching with readiness. The forest, a witness to the unfolding scene, amplified every emotion, reflecting it in the shifting light, the rustling leaves, the distant calls of animals startled into temporary silence. A verbal challenge was finally issued, a statement of presence, a claim of observation, and an assertion of skill. Though words were minimal, their impact was profound. They marked the boundary between coexistence and confrontation, between ordinary daily life and the embryonic stages of human feud. The subtle weight of reputation, pride, and survival instinct converged in this brief exchange, establishing an invisible line whose crossing could ignite conflict at any moment. The tension held for several heartbeats, each one stretching unnaturally long, as if the forest itself had slowed time to witness the negotiation of human instinct. Then, a subtle signal, a bow was drawn, not yet aimed at a target, but held in readiness. Eyes narrowed, movements sharpened, and the psychological stakes became physical. A single action, a twitch, a glance, the positioning of a hand, could serve as the spark for a much larger fire. The forest, indifferent to human calculation, now became a stage for instinct, pride, and survival-driven caution to collide. And yet, no arrow flew in those first moments. Instead, the confrontation existed in tension, anticipation, and mutual awareness. Words, gestures, and glances carried the weight of judgment and intent. It was a delicate ballet of control and instinct, a dance between understanding and aggression, skill and uncertainty. Though no violence erupted, the stage had been set, the initial spark of rivalry was undeniable, and the forest bore silent witness. As the clans slowly withdrew to their respective territories, the first awareness of consequence lingered in every mind. The encounter, brief and nonviolent, had already reshaped perceptions, expectations, and instincts. Children absorbed lessons silently, adults contemplated strategy and reputation, and elders recognized the subtle progression from ordinary coexistence to nascent tension that could not easily be undone. The forest seemed to exhale once more, returning to its rhythm, yet the invisible threads of conflict remained taut, ready to pull lives into motion once again. The morning dawned muted, filtered through a thin mist that clung to the treetops and the forest floor alike. The dew weighed down the leaves, and the forest seemed to hold its breath, as though aware that the delicate balance of human interaction was fraying, poised on the edge of something far greater than a simple disagreement. Life continued, the birds called, small mammals rustled in the underbrush, and the wind carried whispers of distant streams, yet an intangible weight pressed upon the Stonebrick and Ashridge clans alike. The forest itself seemed to vibrate with anticipation. Hunters moved with a new edge to their steps. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig, every distant cry of wildlife was interpreted, analyzed, and assigned meaning. The events of the previous days, the arrow, the whispers, the first confrontation, had reshaped perception. Simple movement was now loaded with potential threat. Even ordinary routines carried double significance. The hunt was no longer only about sustenance, it had become a subtle negotiation of dominance, presence, and warning. Children sensed the shift in the air as well. They moved with more caution, mimicking the careful vigilance of adults without fully understanding why. Their games became quieter, less boisterous, more deliberate. The smallest leaf that fell or branch that snapped could elicit a sudden alertness. Even their laughter, when it broke the quiet, carried a nervous undertone. Instinct worked quietly in their young minds, imprinting lessons about danger, territory, and human rivalry that they could not yet articulate but would carry forward into the future. The elders, however, were acutely aware of the delicate tension that hung over the forest. They met quietly, exchanging subtle gestures, whispers, and glances. Eyes scanned the tree lines, noting positions, movements, and even the wind's direction, calculating where any potential observers might be lurking. Knowledge, intuition, and experience guided them in predicting the actions of the rival clan. Every decision, every instruction, and every subtle shift in posture was imbued with the weight of consequence. The forest was not only a home and hunting ground, it was now a chessboard, and every move carried significance far beyond its immediate impact. From the Ashridge side, similar movements were underway. Scouts and hunters adjusted their patterns, taking care to avoid exposing themselves unnecessarily, yet moving in ways that allowed observation of the Stonebrick camp. The arrow had long since been retrieved, but its symbolism lingered, a mark of skill, presence, and human assertion. Reputation, fragile and precious, could not be ignored. Each clan instinctively recognized the importance of asserting dominance without inviting open conflict too early. This delicate dance required observation, patience, and calculation. The forest amplified every subtle interaction. Sunlight flickered through the leaves, creating transient shadows that played tricks on the eyes. A bird startled into flight seemed to signal movement, a squirrel scurrying across a branch became a potential sign of intrusion, and the wind carried distant sounds that could be interpreted in countless ways. For humans attuned to survival, the forest was alive with meaning, and in this heightened state of awareness, even ordinary phenomena became potential indicators of danger, opportunity, or rivalry. Conversations among the clans were equally laden with unspoken weight. Words were few, precise, and carefully measured. Elders spoke in tones that conveyed authority, yet every inflection, pause, and gesture was analyzed for deeper meaning. A statement about food gathering or hunting strategy might also serve as a subtle assertion of territorial knowledge. In the eyes of the younger hunters, these discussions were lessons in both skill and social navigation, the delicate art of recognizing subtle signals, reading intent, and preparing for what could escalate into open confrontation. Suspicion had begun to weave itself into routine tasks. Hunters checked each other's arrows and weapons with heightened scrutiny, assessing not just functionality but skill and preparedness. Gathering routes were altered slightly, avoiding the most visible paths, as if instinctive caution could prevent observation. Even the positioning of children, tools, and fires became strategic. The forest, once a backdrop for daily life, had become a stage for vigilance and human psychology, where every action could carry dual meaning. By midday, tension had solidified into a tangible presence. Each clan existed in a state of alert awareness, moving through the forest like shadows. Eyes darted constantly, hands brushed subtly against weapons, and posture reflected readiness. Small, seemingly inconsequential encounters, a branch snapping underfoot, a bird taking flight, or the distant sound of movement, now triggered heightened attention. Every hunter, gatherer, and elder carried an internalized sense of responsibility not only for survival but for the unspoken social and territorial order that had begun to assert itself. The psychological weight of rivalry extended even to the natural elements. The sun's movement across the sky was noted, shadows interpreted, and wind direction considered. Even the forest floor seemed to demand attention, every footprint or disturbance catalogued and mentally filed. Awareness became both skill and burden. Humans, accustomed to reading nature for sustenance, now read it for warning, anticipating observation, and potential challenge. The ordinary landscape was transformed into a web of vigilance and strategy, where the unseen carried as much power as the visible. Despite the pervasive tension, moments of beauty and fleeting calm remained. Sunlight breaking through the canopy, a bird's call piercing the forest, or the gentle ripple of the river offered brief respite. These instances reminded the humans that life was not solely defined by conflict or suspicion, that the forest, though fraught with potential danger, was also a source of wonder and sustenance. Yet these moments were tinged with awareness, even awe carried the shadow of consequence, a reminder that harmony was fragile and transient. Rumors and stories circulated quietly among both camps. Each recounting, each subtle exaggeration, served to reinforce awareness and anticipation. "They moved closer than yesterday," one whispered. "I saw the flash of an arrow," another added. Even without direct interaction, these narratives shaped perception and behavior. The arrow that had flown days earlier now seemed omnipresent in memory, a symbol of skill, intent, and challenge. Perception and reality intertwined, creating a tension that was both psychological and social, as well as environmental. As afternoon approached, hunters tested the boundaries of observation, moving slightly beyond previous limits to gauge reactions. Every rustle of leaves, every shifting shadow was scrutinized. Eyes scanned constantly, hands hovered near weapons, and muscles remained taut in readiness. Even in routine activities such as gathering food or repairing shelters, humans were conscious of observers, aware that each gesture and movement could communicate unintentional messages of defiance, strength, or vulnerability. Nightfall arrived slowly, deepening shadows and casting the forest into a muted twilight. Fires flickered in both camps, illuminating faces taut with focus and reflection. Elders conferred quietly, assessing the events of the day and predicting potential reactions. Children, now fully aware of the adult tension, moved more cautiously, shadows stretching long across the ground. The invisible threads of rivalry, seeded by a single arrow and reinforced by whispers and observation, had woven themselves into the fabric of daily life. The air itself seemed heavy with anticipation, every breath carrying both vigilance and unspoken question. In the stillness of the forest, humans became hyper-aware of the smallest details. Every crackle of firewood, rustle of leaves, or distant animal cry held significance. Awareness had become a force of its own, shaping behavior, dictating movement, and reinforcing the fragile balance between coexistence and conflict. As dusk settled over the forest, the canopy transformed into a patchwork of shadows and muted light, a shifting mosaic where the familiar became strange and every sound carried weight. The forest floor, littered with leaves and fallen branches, seemed alive with anticipation, every rustle amplified in the hush of twilight. For the clans, the coming night demanded vigilance, strategy, and the careful management of perception. Ordinary survival had now intertwined with the subtler, more complex game of human rivalry, and every action had significance beyond immediate necessity. In the stonebrick camp, elders convened quietly, their faces illuminated by the flickering glow of a central fire. The arrow that had sparked this chain of tension was a silent presence between them, a reminder of both skill and unintended consequence. Conversation was measured, each word chosen to convey purpose without revealing weakness, to assert awareness without provoking retaliation. Hands traced the outlines of tools and weapons, checking readiness, reinforcing grips, and rehearsing the motions that might be required in the coming hours. Strategy was born of both experience and instinct, as the elders guided the younger hunters through subtle adjustments to posture, placement, and attention. Hunting and gathering routines had been reshaped. Paths through the forest were altered to reduce visibility, while still ensuring access to critical resources. Scouts moved with deliberate silence, practicing movements that were at once ordinary and deeply tactical. Even the arrangement of fires and sleeping areas was reconsidered, positioning them to minimize vulnerability while maximizing the ability to observe intrusions. Every decision was a balancing act, between comfort and safety, visibility and concealment, routine and strategy. Children, though unaware of the full implications, were drawn into this nocturnal choreography. Their play became quieter, gestures more deliberate, and movements more cautious. Elders used these moments to teach subtle lessons about awareness, territory, and instinct. "Notice the shadows," a parent whispered. "Listen to the wind. A step too loud can change everything." Through these quiet, almost invisible instructions, the young were learning the art of observation and strategy, skills that would one day serve not only survival but understanding of human relationships and the invisible rules that governed interaction. Meanwhile, in the Ashridge camp, similar adjustments were underway. The previous day's observation had been carefully analyzed, and now the clan prepared for the night with meticulous attention to detail. Elders discussed likely paths of movement for the stonebrick hunters, predicting where they might appear and how they might respond to subtle provocations. Scouts were positioned strategically, their movements rehearsed to convey watchfulness without revealing intent. Every twig snapped, every leaf displaced, every movement through the shadows was calculated for maximum informational value. As darkness deepened, the forest seemed to become a living participant in this game. The faint whistle of the wind, the distant call of a nocturnal bird, even the movement of small mammals became cues, informing decisions, confirming suspicions, or provoking further caution. Humans, highly attuned to environmental signals, translated these subtle phenomena into strategy and expectation. The ordinary forest was transformed into a dynamic landscape of anticipation, where instinct and calculation intersected in every action. The psychological element of strategy was equally critical. In both clans, awareness of the other's perception became as important as physical readiness. Every action, from the placement of a log to the adjustment of a weapon, communicated information. Elders taught the younger hunters to interpret subtle cues, a glance, a gesture, a posture, as part of a silent dialogue that could influence rivals without words. This awareness of perception and consequence added depth and complexity to the night's activities, transforming routine survival into a subtle negotiation of skill, presence, and respect. Firelight played a significant role in this nocturnal strategy. Shadows cast by flames became tools of observation, obscuring movement while illuminating others. The placement of the fire dictated who could see and who could be seen, a dance of concealment and revelation that mirrored the broader psychological game unfolding in the forest. Even the smallest adjustment, a log repositioned, a child shifted slightly out of view, could alter the perception of readiness or vulnerability. Strategy extended beyond immediate threat into the realm of symbolic communication, where subtle cues reinforce status, skill, and awareness. Food preparation and resource management were conducted with equal caution. Hunters and gatherers moved deliberately, avoiding unnecessary noise or attention. Every task, splitting firewood, cleaning tools, or preparing food, was done with an awareness of observation, intentional or otherwise. Routine became strategic, actions layered with meaning beyond mere survival. In this way, the ordinary rhythm of life was intertwined with the invisible currents of rivalry and vigilance, each moment shaping perception and potential consequence. Elders emphasized patience, teaching that the night was not merely a time of rest but a canvas for observation, learning, and subtle action. Move slowly. Watch closely. Listen to what the forest tells you, one whispered, guiding a young hunter along a shadowed path. Lessons were imparted quietly, through demonstration and repetition, instilling both skill and instinct. The children absorbed these teachings with a blend of curiosity and caution, gradually internalizing the unspoken rules of human interaction, strategy, and consequence. The clans also engaged in a subtle psychological interplay. Every movement, glance, and positioning was calculated to signal readiness, skill, or caution to the rival clan. Even in the absence of direct confrontation, humans communicated constantly through posture, gesture, and environmental manipulation. The arrow that had flown days earlier remained a silent reference point, its significance magnified by observation and interpretation. In this way, the night became a stage for negotiation and assertion, an invisible battlefield where perception shaped reality. By the middle of the night, the forest was filled with quiet, tense motion. Scouts returned with reports, children rested under vigilant eyes, and elders observed patterns of movement and sound. The air seemed thick with anticipation, each breath carrying both caution and awareness. Moments of stillness were punctuated by subtle signs, a rustling branch, a distant hoot, a faint shadow shifting across the underbrush, each interpreted, catalogued, and factored into strategy. The forest, once merely a source of food and shelter, had become a dynamic arena where survival, perception, and rivalry intersected. Sleep, when it came, was shallow and intermittent. Elders took turns watching, eyes scanning the darkness, weapons close at hand. Young hunters mimicked their vigilance, learning through observation and experience. Every instinct, from listening to wind patterns to recognizing subtle changes in the forest floor, was reinforced by the heightened tension of the night. The ordinary rhythms of rest were transformed into lessons in awareness, patience, and anticipation, a crucible where skill, instinct, and strategy were fused together. Dawn broke over the forest in slow, deliberate waves, the first golden light filtering through the dense canopy, scattering across leaves and mossy earth. The mist hung low, clinging to ferns and fallen branches, softening edges, muting sounds, and lending the world a surreal quality. It was a moment of fragile beauty, yet beneath the tranquil appearance, the weight of yesterday's events pressed heavily upon both clans. The previous night had been a crucible, a test of observation, strategy, and silent negotiation. Now, as the day began, tension settled over the forest like a living thing, visible in the posture, glance, and movement of every hunter and elder. The Stonebrick clan stirred with heightened awareness. Elders and hunters emerged from their shelters with eyes that scanned the tree-line, ears attuned to every sound. Each rustle of leaves, every snapping twig, every distant bird call was interpreted with layered significance. The forest was no longer merely a source of sustenance, it had become a theater where perception and presence were measured with care. The arrow, which had been released days earlier, remained an invisible thread connecting all observation, a reminder that skill, intent, and territory could no longer be separated from survival. Hunters adjusted their movements as they ventured outward. Paths were chosen to reduce exposure while maintaining access to game and resources. Steps were deliberate, measured, and carefully synchronized with the rhythm of the forest. A sudden shift in shadow, a flicker of movement through the mist, could signify an animal or an observer. Every sense was heightened, instincts sharpened, and even ordinary routines were infused with vigilance. In this charged atmosphere, the ordinary act of hunting became a nuanced negotiation between presence, skill, and unseen rivals. In the Ashridge camp, tension mirrored that of their neighbors. Scouts reported subtle observations, the flash of movement, the placement of stonebrick tools, or even the direction of smoke from cooking fires. Elders interpreted these signs with experience and calculation, teaching younger hunters to read both natural and human-made signals. They moved with quiet precision, hands close to weapons, bodies low, eyes scanning for any hint of challenge or intrusion. The forest, alive with motion and sound, now served as a medium of communication, where perception could influence strategy and anticipation could dictate action. Even the children were not untouched by the morning's charged atmosphere. Their play became cautious, movements deliberate, glances frequent. Lessons from the night before were reinforced in their behavior, instilling an instinctive understanding of observation, caution, and the invisible rules that governed human interaction. Shadows cast by the rising sun elongated across the forest floor, and every subtle detail became fodder for silent learning. What adults experienced as tension was mirrored in the children's heightened awareness, shaping the next generation's perception of conflict, caution, and survival. The first interactions of the day carried a weight that would have been unimaginable in ordinary times. Hunters encountered each other in shared hunting grounds, careful to acknowledge presence without provoking open conflict. Words, when exchanged, were deliberate and measured, conveying intention, skill, or caution without revealing vulnerability. Each gesture, a nod, the adjustment of a bow, the angle of a spear, was scrutinized by both sides, read as carefully as any spoken sentence. The morning became a choreography of perception, awareness, and social negotiation, where the line between survival and rivalry blurred. Food gathering and preparation were conducted with similar attention to detail. Hunters moved quietly to collect berries, roots, and small game, mindful of wind direction, visibility, and the potential for observers. Even mundane activities such as splitting wood or tending fires were infused with strategic thought, their placement and timing sending subtle signals of presence, skill, and readiness. Each action was observed, consciously or unconsciously, by rival eyes. The forest, indifferent yet omnipresent, bore witness to this delicate dance, recording every nuance in its living memory. The air itself seemed charged with anticipation. Every breeze that rustled through the leaves, every faint crackle of a branch underfoot, every distant animal sound carried dual meanings. Instinct, observation, and calculation intertwined in the consciousness of each clan member. The ordinary rhythm of morning life was heightened into a psychological battleground, where perception could determine behavior, and awareness could dictate survival. The arrow that had once flown with a single purpose now shaped strategy, expectation, and interpretation far beyond its immediate impact. The forest, at first glance, seemed ordinary under the late afternoon sun, its dappled light falling in scattered patches across moss and fallen leaves. Yet the shadows moved differently now, stretching longer, twisting around trunks and boulders, carrying a weight far heavier than mere darkness. For the Stonebrick and Ashridge clans, every shadow held meaning, every flicker suggested possibility, and every shape in the underbrush demanded attention. The arrow, though shot days ago, still cast a long psychological shadow, influencing movement, perception, and strategy. Hunters from both clans became masters of subtlety, learning to manipulate the play of light and dark to their advantage. A Stonebrick scout paused in a shadowed grove, letting his figure merge with the surrounding foliage, eyes scanning for movement, ears attuned to the softest shift in air. The mind, trained by necessity and experience, interpreted every rustle of leaves as either benign or potentially hostile. Each shadow could hide a rival, a predator, or a prey, and the hunter's instincts had evolved to navigate this constant ambiguity with precision. In the Ashridge camp, a similar awareness reigned. Scouts and hunters moved deliberately through half-light, understanding that visibility was both a vulnerability and a tool. The positioning of bodies, the angle of movement, and even the choice of paths through the forest became a subtle language, conveying skill, caution, and presence to those trained to read it. Shadows were not merely obstacles or concealment, they were instruments of strategy, revealing and hiding intent simultaneously. Every branch, every clump of ferns, every bend in a path was considered carefully, not just for practical survival, but for its psychological impact. The elders, ever mindful of both environment and human nature, taught the younger hunters to interpret the forest with heightened perception. "Observe the gaps in shadows," one whispered, pointing to a patch of sunlight that flickered across the forest floor. "They tell more than the eye can see. Movement there can reveal skill, intent, or error." Such guidance reinforced lessons of caution, observation, and strategy, ensuring that instinct was paired with understanding. Even children, watching and learning, absorbed these subtle instructions, training their senses to perceive not just the forest, but the invisible network of human awareness interlaced within it. Small actions carried enormous significance. A stonebrick hunter, repositioning a branch to obscure his tracks, was observed by Ashridge scouts who, though unseen, noted the gesture, interpreting it as skillful, deliberate, and cautious. In response, the Ashridge scouts adjusted their movements, subtly signaling their presence without revealing location, asserting attention and awareness. The forest, indifferent yet omnipresent, witnessed a dialogue without words, a conversation of shadows and movement, shaping perception and reinforcing the invisible hierarchy of vigilance. The psychological tension intensified as both clans navigated the forest with strategic intent. Every glance was measured, every pause deliberate, every movement calculated. The arrow's legacy was clear: one small act had transformed the forest into a theater of awareness, perception, and anticipation. Hunters understood that conflict could arise not only from direct confrontation, but from subtle misinterpretation, a glance taken wrong, or a movement misread. In this way, shadows and strategy became intertwined, guiding both thought and action in a delicate, unspoken negotiation of skill and presence. Children observed cautiously, their gaze subdued, movements tentative. Even in play, lessons of observation and perception were reinforced as they learned to anticipate, interpret, and respond to subtle cues. The forest became a classroom where instinct, skill, and human psychology merged seamlessly. Every shadow, every rustle, every flicker of light provided material for learning, a silent instruction in anticipation, awareness, and the intricate dynamics of human rivalry. Elders reinforced caution through subtle demonstration. A simple act, shifting position, adjusting a weapon, or pausing in a patch of light, was magnified through observation, teaching lessons in patience, awareness, and subtlety. "Move with the forest, not against it," one instructed, gesturing to a pattern of shadows across the moss. "Let your presence be known without revealing weakness. Let your skill speak in silence." In these moments, strategy was not about aggression alone, but about understanding, perception, and control. The interplay of shadow and light also shaped the psychological landscape. Hunters moved more deliberately, aware that even small errors could reveal intent or vulnerability. Elders monitored responses, adjusting guidance to reinforce both readiness and caution. The forest itself seemed to respond to human tension, as light shifted with the passing sun, shadows deepened, and even the wind carried a sense of expectation. In this environment, strategy was inseparable from observation, and awareness became a skill as vital as speed or strength. The subtle positioning of hunters also became a method of communication. By moving in particular ways through the shadows, a hunter could signal skill, awareness, or caution to allies and rivals alike. Even the smallest gestures, the tilt of a head, the alignment of a weapon, or the timing of a step, carried layered meaning. The forest, though indifferent, reflected and amplified these gestures, transforming ordinary survival into a complex dance of perception, strategy, and silent assertion. By mid-afternoon, both clans had adapted to the heightened awareness, using shadows to control visibility, gauge intent, and assert skill. The stonebrick hunters adjusted their movements along familiar trails, while Ashridge scouts mirrored them, balancing caution with subtle assertion. Observation became reciprocal, every act was countered by careful attention, reinforcing vigilance and shaping expectations. The forest floor, sunlight, and shadows became instruments of silent negotiation, with every step and glance reinforcing the invisible rules of engagement. The arrow's symbolic weight continued to resonate. Though it no longer flew through the air, its presence lingered in memory, guiding both perception and strategy. Hunters understood that skill and intent had long-lasting consequences. Shadows, like memory, stretched beyond their immediate physical form, influencing decisions and reinforcing caution. In this way, the forest became a repository of human experience, where actions and observation intertwined, shaping behavior and expectation with precision and subtlety. As the sun began to descend, the forest shifted again, shadows stretching longer, merging, and twisting around tree trunks and rocks. Hunters moved with heightened awareness, using the shifting light to conceal or reveal their positions strategically. Observation remained continuous, thought continuous, and anticipation constant. Every movement of a branch, every distant bird call, and every flicker of light became a cue in the ongoing dialogue between the clans, reinforcing tension, awareness, and readiness. The psychological interplay was perhaps as significant as the physical. Each clan interpreted the actions of the other not merely as immediate events, but as reflections of intent, skill, and caution. The forest, shadowed and complex, became a mirror for human perception, a canvas where strategy and instinct played out in nuanced, almost imperceptible ways. Every decision, gesture, and pause carried layered significance, influencing not only immediate movement but shaping memory, anticipation, and expectation for the hours to come. As twilight approached, the lessons of shadows and strategy crystallized. Elders imparted final instructions for the day, guiding the young hunters in positioning, observation, and interpretation. "The forest speaks," one whispered. "Every shadow, every movement, every silence has meaning. Listen. Watch. Learn. Act only when the moment demands it." Children, absorbing these instructions, internalized the delicate balance of awareness and patience, instinct and interpretation, vigilance and subtlety. The forest seemed to hold its breath. The fading sunlight filtered through the dense canopy, casting long, fragmented shadows across the moss-covered floor. Each movement of leaves, each flicker of light, carried a tension that was almost palpable, a quiet hum of anticipation vibrating through the air. For the Stonebrick and Ashridge clans, the day's strategies had led to this inevitable moment, a silent standoff, where every glance, posture, and minor motion became a declaration of presence, intent, and caution. No words were spoken, yet communication was constant, flowing invisibly through gesture, gaze, and instinct. The clearing where the clans finally observed one another was neither large nor particularly strategic in ordinary terms. Yet in this moment, it became a theater of perception. Every hunter positioned himself deliberately, shoulders squared, weapons at the ready, muscles coiled in restrained energy. Elders watched from slightly behind, faces taut with caution and calculation, eyes scanning the opposing camp for subtle signs of weakness or intent. The children, hidden yet observing, absorbed every detail, learning early that survival was as much a game of perception as it was of skill. The first seconds were a suspended heartbeat. No bird sang, no animal moved, and even the wind seemed to hesitate. The silence amplified every minor sound, a foot shifting on the forest floor, the snap of a twig under a branch, a quiet exhale of breath. Each gesture, intentional or accidental, was magnified through observation and interpretation. Hunters' eyes flicked constantly, reading motion, stance, and orientation as if they were hieroglyphs, carrying meaning far beyond immediate action. The standoff was a dance, invisible yet precise, where instinct, experience, and learned awareness intersected. From the Stonebrick side, the youngest hunter adjusted his bow quietly, careful not to betray excessive readiness while maintaining composure. The arrow that had sparked this entire sequence of events was still present in memory, a psychological shadow that shaped every thought and movement. Each hunter understood the unspoken rule: a misstep, an impatient gesture, or an untimely glance could escalate this quiet tension into outright conflict. The forest itself seemed to pulse with expectation, shadows elongating and folding around the hunters like watchful spectators. The Ashridge clan mirrored the vigilance, maintaining measured positions, breathing slowly, and moving minimally. Their leader, eyes sharp and calculating, signaled subtly to younger hunters to maintain distance while remaining alert. Observation had become both defense and strategy, an unspoken assertion of competence, awareness, and presence. Every hand near a weapon, every subtle lean forward or backward, every silent shift in stance carried layered meaning. The forest had become both arena and witness, every tree, shadow, and patch of moss a backdrop to human negotiation of survival and dominance. Time slowed. Minutes stretched like hours as the standoff persisted. Hunters on both sides assessed, analyzed, and adjusted, balancing caution with subtle assertion. The forest amplified these movements, making the ordinary extraordinary. Leaves quivered under invisible pressure, branches swayed in anticipation, and distant animal calls echoed in ways that felt choreographed to human awareness. Each individual's perception was a combination of instinct, experience, and learned observation, fine-tuned to detect the slightest sign of intention from rival clans. Communication, though silent, flowed constantly. A slight shift of shoulders, a glance toward the tree lean, or the subtle repositioning of a foot conveyed as much as words ever could. Elders read the situation like a living map, interpreting microgestures, posture, and orientation, then guiding younger hunters with imperceptible nods or adjustments. Children, observing in awe, absorbed lessons that were ineffable, learning to interpret nuance, anticipate reaction, and integrate observation into instinct. This was training through presence, a subtle form of education where silence carried meaning heavier than any spoken lesson. The psychological intensity mounted with every passing heartbeat. Each hunter's mind raced through scenarios, measuring risk, calculating consequence, and anticipating possible outcomes. A single misstep, a faltering glance, a nervous movement, a shift of weight, could be interpreted as challenge or weakness. The forest, eternal and impartial, witnessed this delicate balance between vigilance and restraint, recording every action in the mental memory of both clans. Survival had become inseparable from perception, and the silent standoff exemplified the tension between caution and assertion. The arrow remained a silent specter in memory. Its flight had not only wounded pride but had demonstrated skill, courage, and consequence. Hunters carried the weight of that moment, internalized in every glance and posture. Every observation of the rival clan was filtered through the lens of this event, reminding both sides that a single action, however small, could alter relationships, perceptions, and future strategies. The standoff, though devoid of immediate violence, was a test of human patience, skill, and understanding of consequence. Occasionally, the silence was punctuated by minor sounds, a twig snapping beneath a cautious step, a leaf falling, or a distant bird startled into flight. Each sound was interpreted through the lens of strategy, instinct, and caution. A hunter's attention, once focused on survival and sustenance, was now fully integrated with observation, analysis, and anticipation. Awareness became a living skill, a constant companion shaping thought and action alike. Every decision, no matter how small, carried potential impact, reinforcing the invisible rules of engagement that had emerged since the arrow first flew. Elders took turns observing, their eyes shifting rapidly between forest, shadows, and opposing clan. Their guidance, communicated through subtle gestures and careful positioning, shaped the behavior of the younger hunters. "Do not rush," one murmured, "but do not hesitate either. Presence is as powerful as action." These lessons, imparted without fanfare, strengthened the clan's collective vigilance and patience, embedding understanding of both immediate and long-term consequence into the fabric of experience. The children, though young, were acutely aware of tension. Their senses, sharpened by necessity and observation, captured subtle gestures, shifts in posture, and minor sounds. They learned, almost imperceptibly, to integrate instinct with perception, to anticipate consequence without direct instruction. These early experiences of subtle human negotiation in high-stakes situations would shape understanding, skill, and intuition for years to come, planting seeds for the complex social awareness that would define human evolution. As the day waned and shadows deepened, the standoff persisted, unresolved yet intensely charged. Neither clan advanced nor retreated, both holding positions that balanced caution with silent assertion. As the long, tense night finally began to give way to the faintest hints of dawn, the forest seemed to hold a fragile stillness. The first pale light seeped through the dense canopy, illuminating dew-laden leaves, mossy stones, and the twisted trunks of ancient trees. It was a world suspended between night and day, a threshold of possibility where every sound, movement, and shadow carried amplified significance. Both clans, Stonebrook and Ashridge, stirred quietly, acutely aware that the coming day could bring confrontation, discovery, or further subtle negotiation. Preparation was not just practical, it was psychological, strategic, and deeply instinctual. The elders emerged first, faces drawn with concentration, eyes scanning the forest in all directions. Every rustle of leaves, every distant bird call, and every whisper of wind was interpreted with care. Knowledge gained from years of experience guided their instructions, and each movement was deliberate. Young hunters followed their elders, mimicking gestures, absorbing lessons in vigilance, posture, and subtle signaling. In the twilight of early morning, every action was layered with intent. The forest was no longer simply a home or hunting ground but a stage for anticipation and preparation. Stonebrook hunters began the careful routines that would sustain them through the approaching day. Fires were maintained quietly, positioned to provide warmth without revealing location. Food was prepared with efficiency and caution, ensuring energy for both survival and potential conflict. Weapons were checked meticulously, bows were strung, arrows sharpened, and spears balanced for precision. Each task, mundane in isolation, was elevated by awareness. A snapped twig could reveal location, a misplaced branch could betray presence, and even the direction of smoke rising from a cooking fire carried potential meaning to a rival observer. Ashridge scouts mirrored these preparations. Their movements were quiet, deliberate, and informed by the knowledge that observation could be as critical as action. Elders communicated through gestures and subtle eye contact, guiding the younger hunters in careful positioning, surveillance, and the art of remaining both visible enough to assert presence yet concealed enough to maintain tactical advantage. The forest became a living classroom, teaching lessons in perception, instinct, and strategy that went far beyond mere survival. Children, ever observant, mirrored the caution of adults in small but telling ways. Their play was subdued, footsteps measured, glances frequent. Elders encouraged this awareness, recognizing that early lessons in perception, patience, and anticipation would shape instinctive understanding for years to come. Even as they carried out minor tasks, gathering small amounts of food, arranging tools, or observing animal behavior, they were learning about subtle communication, the importance of restraint, and the interplay between environment and human behavior. By the faint glow of first light, both clans had positioned themselves strategically, aware that the forest could conceal and reveal in equal measure. Scouts patrolled the edges of clearings, silently noting tracks, broken branches, and patterns of movement. Hunters tested weapons quietly, drawing bows and releasing arrows into soft targets to maintain skill while remaining mindful of sound. Every action was calculated, balancing readiness with concealment, assertion with discretion. The forest itself, indifferent, yet omnipresent, bore witness to these preparations, recording each movement in the intricate memory of survival. Communication, though minimal, was precise and laden with meaning. A nod could signal agreement or caution, a slight adjustment in stance could indicate readiness, and a deliberate silence could assert observation. Elders guided these nonverbal dialogues, reinforcing lessons in reading intention, anticipating action, and maintaining composure. The day's unfolding events would test not only physical skill but the psychological understanding of presence, vigilance, and consequence. Preparation for dawn was preparation for perception, for understanding that every gesture, glance, and movement could shape what was to come. The psychological tension was amplified by environmental factors. The early morning mist swirled through trees, obscuring paths and creating pockets of concealment. Light shifted across leaves and moss, transforming the familiar forest into a landscape of uncertainty. Hunters used this to their advantage, blending into shadows and choosing angles that minimized exposure. Every rustle of underbrush, every distant call of wildlife, was scrutinized, interpreted, and integrated into an ongoing mental map of potential threats and opportunities. The forest had become a theater of anticipation, where instinct and learned observation intersected seamlessly. Elders emphasized patience and the value of subtle observation. "Move as if you are part of the wind," one instructed, gesturing toward a pattern of shifting light. "Observe, but do not disturb. Presence is silent, skill is quiet, and understanding comes from attention." These lessons underscored that confrontation need not always be immediate. Perception, timing, and preparation could achieve influence and control without the expenditure of energy or risk. Hunters internalized these principles, refining both instinct and strategy in the delicate balance of survival and anticipation. Food and water were managed with a balance of efficiency and discretion. Early morning collection was conducted along less visible routes, minimizing exposure while maintaining essential resources. Even the placement of stones, branches, and tools was considered. Positioning could reveal intent, skill, or caution to an observer. The forest, alive with both natural and human dynamics, demanded attention to the minutiae of movement, timing, and observation. Hunters understood that preparation extended beyond weapons and provisions. It included perception, environmental manipulation, and anticipation. The sun began its ascent, filtering golden light through the canopy. Shadows shifted, elongating and merging, creating zones of concealment and visibility that hunters had learned to manipulate strategically. Every movement, glance, and gesture was informed by anticipation of rival presence. Scouts moved along perimeters, noting the subtle signs of activity, while elders observed patterns and predicted behavior. The forest, eternal yet perceived differently in this charged moment, became a dynamic map of potential action, where every detail mattered. By mid-morning, the preparations for dawn had crystallized into a coherent strategy. Hunters were ready, scouts alert, children observant, and elders guiding with experience and subtle signals. The stage was set for the day's unfolding events: potential conflict, negotiation, or assertion of presence. Every member of both clans understood that the arrow, which had flown days before, had ignited a sequence of consequences that now demanded both attention and anticipation. Survival had evolved into a sophisticated interplay of perception, skill, and instinct. The forest seemed to hold its breath as the first signs of movement stirred along the edges of the clearing. The faint rustle of leaves, the careful placement of a foot, and the subtle shift of a bowstring were amplified by the morning silence, each sound a signal and a test. For both the Stonebrick and Ashridge clans, this was the moment toward which every strategy, every observation, and every preparation had been building, the first encounter since the arrow had flown, an event charged with anticipation, tension, and consequence. The air itself seemed heavier, thick with expectancy, and every hunter moved with measured precision, aware that a single gesture could ignite confrontation. From the Stonebrick side, the first scout emerged from the underbrush, cautious yet deliberate. His eyes scanned the forest floor for tracks, broken branches, or any sign of the rival clan. Every movement was calculated, his body coiled like a spring ready to react. The arrow that had sparked the feud hung in memory, an invisible force guiding posture, pace, and intent. He knew that any misstep could escalate tension into violence, and so he proceeded with a combination of skill, instinct, and careful observation that had been honed through months of survival and training. On the Ashridge side, a mirror of vigilance unfolded. Scouts had already taken up positions, blending into shadows, their presence almost imperceptible. The forest, familiar yet transformed by the anticipation of confrontation, became a dynamic stage. Every glance from a hunter, every shift in stance, was interpreted as both threat and signal. Elders silently guided younger hunters, their subtle gestures shaping behavior, reinforcing patience, and calibrating observation. The forest floor, bathed in dappled sunlight, became a theater of perception, where instinct, strategy, and human psychology intersected. The first crossing of paths was silent, almost imperceptible. Stonebrick and Ashridge scouts caught glimpses of one another through thick underbrush, a flash of movement, a shadow shifting across leaves. Recognition was immediate, and yet no words were spoken. Observation became action, awareness became strategy, and the forest itself seemed to amplify the tension. Every rustle of clothing, every minor adjustment of posture, and every careful step was read, interpreted, and integrated into mental maps of intention and capability. The standoff that had persisted through dawn now transformed into a dynamic dance of subtle assertion. Weapons, though not yet drawn fully, were in readiness. Hunters gripped bows, tested spear points, and allowed their eyes to sweep constantly across the surrounding forest. Movement was deliberate, each step chosen to maintain balance between visibility and concealment. Even a small slip, a misjudged step, or a snap of a branch could signal vulnerability or intent, tipping the delicate balance of anticipation. The arrow's legacy lingered, influencing every movement and choice, a reminder that skill and consequence were inseparable. The psychological intensity of the encounter was immense. Hunters assessed rivals silently, interpreting posture, gesture, and gaze as indicators of strength, skill, and caution. Elders observed the micro-expressions, the subtle shifts in weight, the alignment of weapons, and transmitted guidance through nonverbal signals. Children, hidden yet attentive, absorbed lessons in perception, patience, and instinct. The encounter was both immediate and instructive, a living lesson in the interplay between human awareness, anticipation, and survival. As scouts maneuvered closer, the first verbal acknowledgement was whispered, cautious and controlled. A brief exchange, a word, a name, a reference to territory, carried significance far beyond its simplicity. Each clan interpreted language not only literally but psychologically, gauging tone, intent, and confidence. Every inflection, pause, and hesitation was analyzed. Even silence became a communicative tool, projecting calm, skill, or readiness. The forest, attentive and indifferent, served as the medium through which human interaction, perception, and rivalry unfolded. The first encounter revealed subtle but powerful shifts in strategy. Stonebrick scouts adjusted movement to create observation points without revealing full positions, while Ashridge hunters mirrored these actions, maintaining vigilance while signaling readiness. Shadows and light were manipulated to conceal presence, exaggerate movement, or suggest strength. Hunters used terrain, underbrush, and subtle environmental cues as both shield and tool. The forest, neutral yet alive with motion and sound, became a participant in this negotiation of perception, every element a variable in the unfolding strategy. Physical proximity intensified the tension. The first encounter was not a clash of weapons but a collision of awareness. Each hunter's instincts were tested, honed through observation, experience, and anticipation. The forest's natural sounds, the distant call of a bird, a falling leaf, a shifting branch, became cues integrated into human strategy. Awareness, rather than action, dominated the encounter, as each clan tested the limits of patience, vigilance, and psychological assertion. The arrow that had flown days earlier now existed not merely as a weapon but as a symbol, shaping thought, posture, and interpretation. The psychological interplay extended beyond immediate observation. Each clan projected potential consequences into the future, predicting the rival's possible reactions to every movement, gesture, or sound. Observation became both offensive and defensive, a test of skill and patience. Elders reinforced the subtle art of anticipation, guiding younger hunters to understand that influence could be exerted without overt action. The first encounter, though silent, was saturated with meaning, transforming the forest into a theater of instinct, strategy, and human psychology. Suddenly, a minor slip, a branch underfoot snapping, drew attention. Both sides froze, muscles tensed, eyes locked on the source. For a heartbeat, the forest seemed suspended, every leaf and shadow magnified by anticipation. Then, both scouts adjusted subtly, maintaining composure while signaling awareness. This small incident reinforced lessons in patience, observation, and restraint. The forest, the environment, and human perception were all critical instruments in the art of survival and strategy. The encounter gradually evolved into a series of subtle maneuvers. Scouts from each clan repositioned, creating overlapping zones of observation while avoiding direct confrontation. Every movement was measured to balance caution with assertion, visibility with concealment. Hunters gauged rival reactions, testing readiness, patience, and skill without committing to open action. The first encounter, though void of immediate violence, became a rich field of learning, reinforcing both individual skill and collective understanding of human behavior. By mid-morning, both clans had established a rhythm within the encounter. Stonebrick hunters adapted to Ashridge observation patterns, while Ashridge scouts responded with equal subtlety. The forest, though unchanged in form, had become a dynamic canvas where anticipation, perception, and instinct coalesced. Every glance, gesture, and slight movement carried weight, creating a complex dialogue that transcended speech or direct action. The arrow's legacy persisted, shaping behavior and reinforcing the intertwined nature of skill, consequence, and awareness. Finally, the first encounter drew to a temporary pause as both sides retreated slightly to reassess. No shots were fired, no violence erupted, yet the significance was profound. Observation, patience, and subtle strategy had dominated the interaction, reinforcing lessons in perception, awareness, and anticipation. The arrow, which had ignited the feud, had now set into motion a chain of behaviors that extended far beyond immediate survival. Both clans understood, tacitly and instinctively, that the forest itself bore witness, recording the consequences of skill, restraint, and presence. The forest had returned to its seemingly tranquil state, yet beneath the surface, the tension lingered like a taut thread ready to snap. The first encounter between the Stonebrick and Ashridge clans had concluded without bloodshed, yet its impact resonated far beyond the immediate moment. Every hunter, scout, and elder carried the invisible weight of perception, memory, and anticipation. The arrow, which had flown days earlier, had become more than a weapon. It was now a symbol, a catalyst, and a warning, reverberating through thought and strategy like an unspoken command etched into consciousness. The echoes were subtle at first, appearing in posture, glance, and the timing of movements. Stonebrick hunters moved through the forest with heightened awareness, recalibrating the paths they would take, the angles from which they observed, and the distance they maintained from one another. Each tree, boulder, and patch of underbrush became a marker in the invisible map of caution and opportunity. Shadows no longer existed merely as concealment, they were active participants in strategy, shaping movement, dictating observation, and signaling intent. Ashridge hunters mirrored this hyper-awareness. Every rustle of leaves, every bird call, and every subtle alteration in wind direction was scrutinized for signs of rival presence or strategy. The arrow's legacy had become an unspoken code. It reminded both clans that even a single act could ripple through time, influencing decisions, behavior, and perception in ways far beyond the immediate. Elders guided younger hunters to internalize these lessons, teaching them to anticipate, interpret, and react with both caution and skill. Observation was no longer passive, it was an active, strategic exercise intertwined with survival. Even the children were not immune to these echoes. Their games became measured, movements cautious, and glances frequent, absorbing lessons in anticipation, presence, and consequence. Elders subtly reinforced these behaviors, ensuring that each generation internalized the critical importance of observation, restraint, and strategy. The forest, once simply a setting for survival and play, had transformed into a living classroom, where instinct, learning, and human awareness converged seamlessly. The echoes also manifested in the subtle interplay of human psychology. Every hunter interpreted the actions of rivals not only for immediate threat but for insight into temperament, patience, and skill. A glance, a pause, or a minor adjustment of a bow could indicate readiness, caution, or confidence. These small acts, magnified by observation and anticipation, carried weight far beyond their immediate physical impact. The forest, impartial yet intimately aware of human behavior, served as the stage for this complex interplay of instinct, cognition, and strategy. From a distance, the forest appeared unchanged, sun filtered through the canopy, birds called softly, and the wind whispered through leaves. Yet for those attuned to its nuances, it had transformed. Tracks left in mud, snapped branches, or displaced leaves became data points in a constantly updating mental map. Hunters learned to anticipate the movements of rivals, to predict behavior, and to adjust their own actions accordingly. The echoes of the arrow shaped every decision, infusing ordinary survival tasks with psychological and strategic significance. Elders emphasized reflection as much as observation. "Think beyond the arrow," one whispered, gesturing to a pattern of tracks. "Consider the reaction it provoked, the intent it revealed, and the consequences that follow." One act can become a story that teaches, warns, and shapes behavior for years. These lessons reinforced the understanding that actions were rarely isolated, they were part of a continuum, a ripple through time and perception. Every hunter internalized the arrow's lesson, not merely as a tool of violence but as a lesson in consequence, awareness, and strategic thought. Hunting patterns shifted subtly. Stonebrick hunters moved through the forest with greater caution, adjusting timing, paths, and posture to maximize observation while minimizing exposure. Similarly, Ashridge scouts modified routes, employing misdirection and shadow to maintain awareness without revealing full position. The forest became an active participant in strategy, a living map where instinct, anticipation, and skill intersected. The arrow's flight, once singular, now influenced decisions, shaping behavior across distance and time, embedding lessons in every choice and movement. The psychological weight of the arrow's legacy extended to interpersonal dynamics within each clan. Hunters observed not only rival behavior but also one another, interpreting gestures, posture, and decision-making as indicators of competence, patience, and judgment. Elders guided these interpretations, ensuring that lessons in observation, anticipation, and strategy were passed on. Children absorbed this complex web of insight almost instinctively, internalizing an understanding of consequence, restraint, and vigilance. The forest became both teacher and witness, embedding knowledge into human behavior in subtle yet enduring ways. Natural phenomena were interpreted through the lens of this heightened awareness. A sudden gust of wind, a falling branch, or the flash of a distant bird became cues integrated into strategy, influencing movement and positioning. Hunters learned to interpret every detail, no matter how small, as potential insight into the behavior of rivals or the environment itself. The echoes of the arrow shaped perception so completely that survival now depended on understanding both natural and human systems simultaneously. Over time, minor interactions reinforced these lessons. A fleeting glimpse of a rival hunter through branches, a misinterpreted sound, or an unexpected movement became data points in a continuous mental mapping of behavior, capability, and intent. Each observation reinforced anticipation and caution, embedding the consequences of the arrow's flight into daily life. Survival had evolved from purely physical skill to a sophisticated interplay of cognition, awareness, and strategic interpretation. By midday, the forest hummed with invisible tension. Hunters moved in patterns influenced by the first encounter, anticipating rival presence and testing both patience and skill. Shadow and light, terrain, and subtle environmental cues were used deliberately to communicate awareness, assert presence, or obscure intent. Each movement carried layered meaning, reinforcing that the arrow's influence extended beyond immediate conflict into the realm of human psychology, strategy, and social negotiation. The elders emphasized memory as a tool. "Remember the arrow," one instructed, "not just where it landed, but what it taught. Notice how your rivals respond, how your own instincts react, and how the forest reflects these moments. Knowledge carries power beyond any weapon. The young hunters internalized this instruction, understanding that even absent violence, observation, anticipation, and interpretation were vital instruments of survival. The forest, patient and eternal, bore witness, embedding these lessons into the human experience. As afternoon shadows lengthened, subtle strategies emerged. Stonebrick hunters adjusted positions to exploit terrain, using subtle cover to observe without revealing themselves. Ashridge scouts countered with minor shifts, maintaining awareness and signaling readiness without overextending. The encounter of the day before, combined with the lingering psychological influence of the arrow, had created a complex web of observation, restraint, and strategic anticipation. The forest, though unchanged, had transformed in perception, becoming a dynamic stage for human intellect, instinct, and subtle competition. The forest, once a quiet observer of anticipation, became charged with the tension of imminent action. Morning mist still clung to the ground, drifting lazily around twisted tree trunks, but the air carried a weight that was palpable. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig, every distant bird call seemed amplified, interpreted not as mere natural noise but as potential signals of presence and intent. For the Stonebrick and Ashridge clans, the preparations, observations, and subtle encounters that had stretched over days and nights now converged on this singular moment. The first blood was about to be drawn, and the forest seemed to lean in, its shadows stretched and trembling with anticipation. Stonebrick hunters moved cautiously along a narrow ridge, their weapons carefully balanced, eyes sharp, muscles taut. They understood that stealth and timing were as vital as strength. A single misstep could invite lethal retaliation. Elders guided the young hunters, whispering subtle instructions that emphasized patience, observation, and the strategic use of terrain. Each footfall was deliberate, calculated to avoid snapping branches, rustling leaves, or stirring loose soil that could betray their presence. The arrow, which had once flown and sparked tension, remained a symbolic reminder of consequence, a silent teacher embedded in memory and instinct. Across the clearing, Ashridge scouts mirrored this vigilance, their bodies blending seamlessly into shadowed underbrush. Every glance, every slight adjustment in posture, was a silent assertion of awareness and readiness. Elders, positioned to oversee both strategy and reaction, reinforced discipline through nonverbal signals, ensuring that young hunters interpreted both subtle warning and guidance. Observation, anticipation, and psychological awareness had become the very foundation of survival, and this foundation would now be tested against immediate, lethal necessity. The first moment of action was almost imperceptible. A Stonebrick hunter, advancing carefully along the ridge, noticed a flicker of movement near a cluster of ferns. Time seemed to slow, the forest appeared suspended. The hunter's breath caught, muscles coiled instinctively, and eyes locked on the slight rustle. The target, a young Ashridge scout, had not yet been fully aware of his presence. The forest seemed to pause as instinct, training, and anticipation converged in a single decisive instant. With precision, born of necessity, the hunter released an arrow. The shaft cut silently through the damp morning air, striking its mark with brutal accuracy. The young scout fell, a gasp caught in his throat, eyes wide with shock and incomprehension. The forest, which had previously observed without comment, now trembled with tension. The first blood had been drawn, and the invisible web of anticipation and observation exploded into tangible consequence. Immediately, the dynamics of the forest shifted. Stonebrick hunters froze for a heartbeat, alert to the reaction of the Ashridge clan. The silence shattered as the fallen scout's companions reacted, a mixture of alarm, grief, and instinctive aggression igniting the forest. The first clash, though brief and chaotic, revealed the depth of skill, instinct, and psychological calculation that had been honed over generations. Hunters on both sides moved with a combination of urgency and caution, understanding that every decision now carried immediate and irreversible consequence. The psychological impact of the first blood rippled through both clans. Fear, grief, anger, and adrenaline intermingled, sharpening perception and instinct. Elders maintained a delicate balance, guiding the hunters to respond with precision rather than reckless aggression. The forest itself, indifferent yet intimately tied to human action, became a dynamic battlefield, where shadows, terrain, and subtle environmental cues were leveraged as weapons as much as arrows and spears. Every movement carried layered significance, every glance conveyed both intention and calculation. Stonebrick hunters advanced cautiously, understanding that the first arrow had set the tone but had not ended the confrontation. They used terrain to their advantage, positioning themselves along ridges, behind trees, and within shadowed undergrowth. Their movements were synchronized and deliberate, designed to maximize awareness while minimizing exposure. Every sound was interpreted, every shift in light or shadow became a potential signal. The forest, though unchanged, seemed alive with the consequences of human action, reflecting tension, vigilance, and anticipation. Ashridge hunters responded with equal skill and deliberation. Panic was tempered by training, grief was tempered by strategy. They adjusted positions, using terrain and concealment to observe and counter the stonebrick advance. Every subtle gesture, the tilt of a head, the repositioning of a bow, the alignment of a spear, carried layered meaning. The forest, a silent witness, absorbed these exchanges, documenting the unfolding human drama in ways both immediate and enduring. Observation, anticipation, and calculated action had become inseparable from survival. Children and younger members, hidden yet aware, absorbed the scene with wide eyes and taut muscles. Even in fear, they learned lessons in instinct, caution, and strategic observation. Elders reinforced these lessons subtly, ensuring that the next generation internalized both skill and psychological acuity. The first blood, though tragic, became a moment of intense education, a visceral demonstration of cause and effect, consequence and response, instinct and strategy intertwined. The clash escalated in brief, controlled bursts. Arrows flew, spears were thrust with precise intent, and hunters moved through the forest with a combination of caution and aggression. The echo of the initial arrow guided every decision, movement, timing, positioning, and reaction. Even minor environmental details, a protruding root, a fallen branch, the slope of a hill, became critical tactical considerations. The forest had transformed into a living arena, where human skill, instinct, and psychological understanding collided with relentless intensity. Elders on both sides maintained composure, directing attention and coordinating observation. "Do not act out of anger," one instructed. "Let the forest guide you. Watch, anticipate, and strike only when necessary." These words, whispered yet commanding, shaped the tempo and precision of the confrontation. Each hunter internalized the principle that survival and success relied as much on mental acuity and awareness as on physical skill. The first blood was not merely a wound, it was a catalyst, a lesson, and a warning rolled into a single, inescapable moment. As the fight unfolded, the arrow's legacy became increasingly apparent. One strike led to counteraction, which in turn prompted observation and adjustment. The forest became an intricate puzzle of movement, positioning, and anticipation. Hunters on both sides demonstrated mastery of their environment, manipulating light, shadow, and terrain to assert presence while minimizing vulnerability. The forest, once a stage of preparation and anticipation, now felt heavy with the weight of consequence. The morning's clash, the first blood drawn, had left its invisible scars etched into both the landscape and the minds of those who had survived it. The Stonebrick and Ashridge clans retreated to their respective camps, but the retreat was neither complete relief nor casual withdrawal. Every movement was calculated, every glance deliberate, and every action informed by a profound awareness of risk, loss, and the ripple of consequences set in motion by that single, fatal arrow. Stonebrick hunters moved silently through the underbrush, their senses heightened, alert to every sound, shadow, and subtle shift in the forest. Their triumph was tempered by the knowledge that the Ashrich clan remained vigilant, capable, and ready to respond. Elders emphasized reflection over celebration, guiding younger hunters to internalize lessons in observation, strategy, and psychological acuity. Victory, one whispered, is never complete until wisdom has followed action. Remember the arrow, but also remember patience, caution, and consequence. The words carried weight, imprinting a deep understanding that survival extended far beyond the immediate moment. Ashrich hunters, meanwhile, processed the shock of loss with a mixture of grief, anger, and determination. Their fallen scout had become a symbol of vulnerability, of skill demonstrated by the rival clan, and of the stark reality that survival required both caution and strategic awareness. Elders comforted and guided, blending mourning with practical instruction. The forest itself bore witness to both pain and resilience, a living backdrop against which humans internalized lessons of consequence, anticipation, and the intertwined nature of action and perception. Children in both clans observed in hushed, watchful silence. Their play was muted, their movements cautious, and their eyes wide with understanding beyond their years. Even in fear, they absorbed lessons in instinct, observation, and social dynamics. Elders recognized that the first blood had become more than a moment of violence, it was an education in awareness, patience, and consequence, embedding knowledge that would shape behavior for years to come. The forest, familiar yet forever changed, served as an instructor and witness, recording each subtle lesson in the minds and movements of the young. The physical aftermath was marked by minor signs of disruption, scattered leaves, trampled undergrowth, and broken branches, but it was the psychological landscape that bore the most profound consequences. Hunters recalibrated patrols, adjusted perimeters, and reassessed both observation and approach. Every movement carried layered significance, every decision informed by the echo of the first blood. The arrow had transformed from a simple tool into a symbol, a measure of skill, and a lesson in consequence, its influence rippling outward through thought, instinct, and strategy. Elders convened councils to analyze the encounter. Maps of the forest were recreated in minds and gestures, positions of hunters reconstructed, and movements dissected for insight. Lessons were extracted not only from the immediate success or failure but from subtle details, timing, posture, environmental manipulation, and psychological response. Knowledge, strategy, and instinct merged into a sophisticated understanding of consequence and anticipation. The first blood had taught more than the lethality of the arrow, it had revealed the intricacy of human perception and the depth of psychological strategy required to survive in this forested world. The emotional landscape was equally complex. Survivors felt relief, fear, grief, and exhilaration simultaneously. The gravity of taking life weighed heavily, mingling with pride in skill and awareness. Elders guided these emotions carefully, ensuring they were neither repressed nor indulged recklessly. Each hunter was encouraged to reflect, internalize lessons, and prepare mentally for the challenges that lay ahead. The forest, though indifferent, seemed to resonate with the intensity of human emotion, amplifying awareness, shaping perception, and reinforcing the delicate balance between caution and action. Stonebrick and Ashrich hunters alike attended to practical concerns, but each task was layered with heightened awareness. Food was gathered, weapons maintained, and observation posts reinforced, all conducted with the knowledge that vigilance could not be abandoned. The first blood had transformed routine survival into a perpetual exercise in perception, strategy, and anticipation. Every rustle of leaves, every shifting shadow, and every whisper of wind carried meaning. The forest had become a living map of risk and opportunity, and every movement required interpretation, foresight, and careful execution. Reflection extended beyond the immediate events. The arrow, its flight, and the consequences it had set into motion were analyzed continually. Hunters discussed the factors leading to success or failure, debated timing and approach, and predicted potential reactions of the rival clan. These reflections were both practical and philosophical. Survival was inseparable from awareness, action was inseparable from consequence, and even a single act could echo indefinitely. The arrow had become more than a weapon, it was a lesson, a narrative, and a symbol, shaping thought, instinct, and strategy for all who had witnessed or participated in its effects. The forest itself seemed to absorb the tension and reflection. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, casting patterns across the trampled undergrowth. Shadows stretched, retreated, and shifted, as if responding to human thought and emotion. Birds called cautiously, and small animals moved with heightened vigilance. The environment, though unchanged in structure, had become acutely sensitive to the altered human presence. Hunters adapted accordingly, refining movements, anticipating patterns, and integrating environmental cues into strategy. The first blood had transformed the forest into an active participant in human survival, its features intertwined with both physical and psychological tactics. Even moments of rest were charged with tension. Hunters slept lightly, one eye open, attuned to subtle sounds, movements, and changes in light. Elders monitored both the young and the experienced, offering guidance through gestures, quiet words, and presence. The lessons of the first blood extended into the most intimate aspects of daily life: rest, nourishment, and conversation were all infused with awareness, restraint, and anticipation. Survival had become inseparable from observation, strategy, and reflection, each reinforcing the other in a continuous cycle. The forest, once alive with the delicate tension of anticipation and observation, now pulsed with a more dangerous, simmering energy. The first blood had been drawn, and with it came the shadow of revenge, a silent, persistent force that crept into every thought, every gesture, and every corner of both the Stonebrick and Ashridge clans. Where once preparation had been a careful exercise in strategy and observation, it was now tinged with an urgent need for retribution. The arrow that had ignited the feud was no longer merely a weapon, it had become a symbol, a call to action, and a catalyst for a cycle of response that both clans instinctively understood could escalate into lasting consequences. Stonebrick hunters, though victorious in the initial confrontation, were not untroubled. The first blood weighed heavily upon them, not merely as a reminder of their lethal skill, but as a harbinger of retaliation. Elders emphasized the dual necessity of vigilance and prudence. Strength alone does not guarantee survival, one instructed, voice low yet firm. Remember, the forest watches as much as it teaches. Revenge is a shadow, do not chase it blindly. Young hunters, still absorbing lessons from the day's events, internalized this wisdom while simultaneously sensing the inexorable pull of retaliation. Their instincts urged caution, yet the human impulse for justice, or vengeance, gnawed at the edges of strategy. Across the clearing, Ashridge hunters nursed the wound of loss, their grief coiling tightly around a growing determination. The fallen scout had become more than a victim, he was now a symbol of clan honor and the debt of the arrow that had flown. Elders guided their response with careful deliberation, stressing preparation and observation while acknowledging the deep, unavoidable drive toward revenge. Let anger teach without consuming, one whispered, gesturing toward the forest. Plan, anticipate, and strike with precision when the time is right. The forest remembers every act. Each hunter internalized the dual nature of their path, the desire for retribution balanced with the need for strategic patience. The psychological tension was magnified by environmental cues. Mist clung stubbornly to low branches, distorting shapes and elongating shadows across the forest floor. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig could signify rival presence, deliberate observation, or simply the indifferent movement of wildlife, but perception was key. Hunters interpreted every small shift in light, wind, or sound through the lens of heightened vigilance, blending instinct with careful analysis. Shadows became more than concealment, they were tools, weapons, and signs, shaping movement, posture, and intent. Children, ever alert and sensitive, absorbed the charged atmosphere in ways subtle yet profound. Their movements were careful, their attention unwavering, and their understanding of consequence grew with each passing hour. Elders encouraged this observation, reinforcing lessons about cause and effect, restraint, and strategic awareness. The forest became a living tutor, teaching not only survival skills but the intricate psychology of human conflict. The shadows of revenge, though unseen, extended into the youngest minds, embedding awareness and instinct that would guide behavior for years to come. Both clans began subtle preparations for the inevitable continuation of conflict. Stonebrick hunters refined patrol routes, adjusting positions to anticipate Ashridge movements while preserving the advantage of surprise. Spears were sharpened, arrows carefully strung and tested, and perimeters strengthened through observation and environmental manipulation. Ashridge hunters mirrored this process, emphasizing concealment, awareness, and adaptive positioning, preparing to strike or defend with lethal precision. The forest, indifferent yet alive with consequence, became both classroom and battlefield, each leaf, rock, and shadow a component of strategy and perception. The tension between restraint and action was palpable. Revenge was a shadow, stretching across minds and bodies, urging swift retribution while demanding patience. Elders counseled both sides on timing, urging hunters to observe patterns, anticipate rival reactions, and act decisively when the opportunity was optimal. Every movement was weighed for both immediate effect and long-term consequence. The first blood had demonstrated the lethal efficiency of skill. The shadow of revenge now added an emotional intensity that threatened to overwhelm reason if not carefully managed. The forest itself seemed to reflect this charged atmosphere. Birds moved cautiously from branch to branch, their calls subdued. Small mammals scuttled with heightened alertness, as though aware of the invisible tension coursing through the undergrowth. Light shifted across leaves, elongating shadows and creating pockets of concealment and exposure. Hunters leveraged these natural dynamics to communicate, anticipate, and strategize. Every environmental detail, wind direction, shifting light, or uneven terrain, was integrated into tactical planning. Revenge, though intangible, became a force that shaped both human action and environmental perception. As the day progressed, both clans engaged in subtle psychological maneuvers, testing the patience and awareness of rivals without triggering full-scale confrontation. A stonebrick scout might reveal a fleeting shadow of presence, only to vanish moments later, prompting heightened vigilance from Ashridge observers. Similarly, Ashridge hunters subtly repositioned, their movement hinting at readiness while maintaining concealment. The dance of revenge unfolded in measured, almost imperceptible ways, as each clan learned to anticipate, manipulate, and interpret behavior with increasing sophistication. The emotional undercurrent of revenge influenced even the most routine activities. Gathering food, tending fires, and maintaining weapons were conducted with heightened awareness, integrating lessons of caution, observation, and strategic foresight. Hunters understood that any lapse could be exploited, that a single misstep could trigger retaliation, and that the shadows of revenge extended into every interaction, every gesture, and every choice. The forest, impartial yet alive with consequence, bore witness to these actions, recording both the subtle and overt expressions of human intention. By evening, the shadow of revenge had solidified into a complex network of expectation, strategy, and psychological tension. Both clans assessed potential vulnerabilities, predicted rival strategies, and reinforced both physical and mental preparedness. The first blood, once a singular act, had now evolved into a catalyst for prolonged rivalry, embedding lessons in anticipation, patience, and tactical skill. Elders guided younger hunters in interpreting both environment and rival behavior, ensuring that the drive for retribution was tempered with awareness and precision. The night brought an eerie calm, yet the shadow of revenge remained ever present. Hunters slept lightly, one eye open, muscles tensed for sudden movement.